Chapter 115, Destiny. Chapter 115, Destiny. Swing after swing of the Imperial Army's blades pressed in towards them. The soil under their feet was already soaking wet from the splashes of blood. A bandit who was still alive was pinned to the ground. He listened to the never-ending screams until even his pants were wet with piss. The back of a blade pressed up against the back of his neck. His nose and mouth were smeared all over with blooded water, choking him until tears and mucus flowed. He cried in terror, "I don't know. I really don't know." Lei Jingzhe was suspicious by nature, and he was very secretive about his whereabouts when he was in Mount Luo. Other than his trusted aides, no one else knew his exact hiding place. Tan Tai, who scraped away the bloody mud on the soles of his boots and said, "Since you know nothing, then why are you wasting our time? Drag him away." Both of the bandit's arms were bound behind his back, and the Imperial Army dragged him by the rope to the execution spot. He kicked out both legs, looking at those headless corpses lying on either side of him. The back of the blade that had been pressing against his nape was already turned over, and the sharp edge of the blade made him tremble all over. He watched Tan Tai, who lifted his blade and suddenly burst out bawling. "Liuer, sir. I know where Liuer is." Tan Tai, who asked, "Is this person a trusted aide of Lei Jingzhe?" Yes, a trusted aide." The bandit's chest heaved as he stared wide-eyed at that blade and said, "Liuer is our carrier pigeon. He is the one who passes on all the orders issued by Lei Jingzhe. It was also Liuer who sent someone to pass me the message telling me to bring the men to hide out in the west." After having been here for half a night, Tan Tai who finally managed to pry out some information. He lifted the man and asked, "Where is this Liuer now?" "In Bianshui town." The bandit answered. "The information I received a few days back came from Bianshui town. If you go look for him now, you will definitely find him." Bianshui town was just a few li away, but on second thoughts, Tan Tai who felt that it did not bode well. They had searched through that place many times, and in all probability, they had already alerted the enemy. He hurriedly released his grip on the man and strode away to report to Xiao Qie. The Imperial Army promptly changed direction and raced to Bianshui town. They set up a heavy siege outside the town, then searched from house to house and detained all the recent arrivals with questionable origins who were not registered in the household register. The bandits were identified one by one, but there were no traces of Liuer and Lei Jingzhe. Seeing as dawn was about to break, the bandit feared that Xiao Qie would take out his anger on him, so he racked his brain to offer suggestions. He said, "Liuer has plenty of followers, they are all his snoops and spies. Every time he heads out for battles, they will spread out all around him to facilitate the relaying of updates to Lei Jingzhe. Now that they are not here, it's most likely because they have gotten wind of it and fled. You have blocked off access to the south, and we don't dare to head north, so we can only retreat east. If you give chase now, you'll definitely be able to catch up to them." Although Tan Tai, who despised a spineless coward like him who would sell out his master for his own benefit, he still reported the information as it was to Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie considered it over for a moment on his horse before he said to Tan Tai who, "Take half of your men and chase after them along the eastern side of the mountain forest. They are now birds that will be startled at the mere twang of a bowstring. Just intimidate them a little, and they will be in such panic that they won't be able to turn around and meet the attack head-on as usual. You just need to hit them hard. Those remaining 1,000 people are all scattered soldiers without contact with their commander. They won't be able to hold their own against you." Tan Tai who acknowledged his orders, only to see Xiao Qie gathering the remaining men. So he asked, "Since that's the case, wouldn't it do for master to wait for me here? Why make another trip? Look at Lei Jingzhe's behavior and demeanor, and you should know that he's not only suspicious by nature but also terrified of death. Whatever we can think of, he can think of it too. If heading east is the only way for them to take, he will not go along with such a large contingent of troops. That is too big a target, it's too obvious." Xiao Qie wound up his horsewhip and said, since he dared to use Lei Changming as a live target earlier, he will similarly dare to use these remaining 1,000 people as live targets as well. "You may set your mind at ease and head east. I'll go block him." It was scorching hot these 2 days. The sun was so blazing that it made the bandits burning with anxiety even more restless and uneasy. They squatted in groups in the mountain forest. Seeing as Lei Jingzhe had been slow to show himself, they loudly questioned Liu, who was standing on a rock. Master Liu is also a part of the council, so you would be clearer than us when it comes to news of the second-in-command. What is the situation now? Tell us. Liu stuffed tobacco into his pipe but did not manage to find a flint. He squatted on the rock and looked up at the clear, cloudless sky. It was too bright to take in everything at a glance. He clicked his tongue and said, "I'm here to deliver a message, aren't I? That is, go home. The Imperial Army has captured a few hundred brothers under my command, and I still don't know if they are alive or dead now. I'm waiting for the second-in-command to come up with an idea to save them, and he's telling us to go home just like this. Isn't this just tucking our tails between our legs and subjecting ourselves to bullying?" A man with a booming voice stood up and said with discontent, "We were all big names back in Mount Luo, and we followed him to Tsizhou so that we would have no lack of food and water. In the end, we have all become cowards like tortoises hiding in their shells. This is really fucking pissing me off. Isn't this all because we are down on our luck?" Liu not only looked like a shrewd old monkey, the way he handled matters was also similar. He had a lot to complain about regarding Lei Jingzhe's current order, but he would never voice it out, so he said in an attempt to smooth things over, "Even if you return to Mount Luo now, you will still be a big name there. Whom among us can take it lying down? But there will be times when even a horse will stumble. It's no big deal if we suffer from the occasional defeat. All you have to do is report the number of people you have lost to the council later and get the second-in-command to make it up to you, as well as allocate some silver to you. Surely he won't shortchange you. Do I look like I give a damn about that bit of silver?" The man spat. "I'm heartbroken for those brothers. Do you think people are that easily replaced nowadays? Didn't you see the public notice posted by the Imperial Army? Tsizhou wants to rebuild its garrison troops. There are meals and fields to be had. Why would anyone give up a decent job in a regular army and join us? They got a screw loose up there. Moreover, our numbers are much greater than the Imperial Army. We should have just fought them the first time we encountered them at the foot of Tsizhou's city gate. But he feared this and that. The fuck he's afraid of? This is just great. We haven't even met them head-on, and we have already inexplicably lost." Sounds of agreement rang out all around at his words. Creases formed at the corners of Liu's eyes. He said, "The second-in-command is just being cautious. The Imperial Army is well equipped. Look at those armors that are so polished they shine. We might not necessarily be their match if we really come to blows. They just look impressive on the surface." The man wiped the phlegm he had spit out with the sole of his shoe and said, "What kind of troops is the Imperial Army? How many battles have they fought? They can't fight for nuts. They only fought once with the 8 great training divisions at the gate of Zhongbua. Can that even be called a battle? That's called a pissing contest. Whoever the fuck stands the longest wins." Laughter broke out all around. The man noisily cleared his throat and tugged at his collar again to reveal a reddish chest. He said, "As I see it, we are not in a hurry to leave. Tsizhou is such a big gold mine. If we miss it this time, it'll be harder to lay our hands on it the next time. The Imperial Army goes around posting notices everywhere to get the common folks to tip them off. But at the end of the day, they are still afraid, no? If not, then let them bring it on. We are now all gathered together, and we have at least 5,000 or 6,000 people. Just engaging in guerrilla warfare in the mountains alone will be enough to make the Imperial Army suffer." Liu did not kick up a stink with him or make a decision. He rubbed the pipe in his hand and said, "The second-in-command said to go back, and you still want to fight them. Then go notify him yourself. He wants to be a cowering tortoise and hide his head under his crotch. Where am I supposed to go looking for him?" The man sneered. "He doesn't even dare to show his face. Why? Afraid there's an Imperial Army spy among the brothers? Bah." The man that Lei Jingzhe had used as a shield that day when he fled was none other than this man's prospective brother-in-law. His younger sister was just as burly as him, and she had been previously unable to find a suitable person to marry. It had not been easy to find a man who treated his younger sister well this time, and they were even ready to have the wedding at the year of the year. But who would have expected Lei Jingzhe to use him as a shield this trip? He hated Lei Jingzhe for being hard-hearted, and he also resented Lei Jingzhe for subjecting them to this kind of frustration they could only bottle up. I'll repeat the second-in-command's words. Liu stood up and pounded at his waist with his pipe. He said, "We are now the vanguard squad. We don't have many people, but we are still different from those minor bandits we came across on the way. As long as we can get out of Xizhou's border within 5 days and arrive at Duanzhou's relay station, we can be considered to be back in our own territory. By then, we will have nothing to fear even if the Imperial Army wants to continue pursuing us." On seeing the fury on that man's face after he was done speaking, he continued, "Of course, the second-in-command is still hurrying on his way here. Whether we leave or stay is open to discussion." They were initially bandits gathered from various mountain strongholds. Although Lei Changming was usually a headstrong man, he was very generous to the brothers, showering them with meat and wine, money, and women. Even if they made a mistake, they only had to plead for mercy for the matter to be dropped. But Lei Jingzhe was different. Not only did he rarely show himself, he was also rather severe in meting out punishments. 8 or 9 out of 10 wrongdoers who ended up in his hands would all meet their ends. He relied on inspiring awe to lead these bandits. Those who feared him outnumbered those who respected him. Now that everyone had fallen into dire straits together, it was inevitable for them to start harboring other intentions. One could take turns to be the emperor, so why not the chief of the bandits? He who is capable is qualified. Seeing how Liu was a weathercock who did not want to offend both sides, the man said, "Fine, the second-in-command won't come, and he tells us to flee by ourselves. I'm of the view that he can be unrighteous, but we can't be unrighteous. The Imperial Army is still at Bianshire town, right? Liu, don't you fucking leave any traces behind. Let's take this place as our camping ground and carry out harassment in small groups. We are used to climbing mountains. As long as the Imperial Army gathers manpower and turns around to fight us, we will run back. Forget it if they don't enter the mountain, but if they dare to pursue their way in, then we will take all of them down and not let anyone return alive. As long as he's human, he will not be able to hold out if we keep up with this war of attrition against him for a few days. When the time comes, we'll charge our way down in one burst of energy and beat the shit out of him. The city of Xizhou will still fall into our hands as long as the Imperial Army is afraid, no? So how about it? Do we do it or not?" The remaining people were all fired up by his words. They had been living like vermin detested by all these few days. Not only were they killed by the Imperial Army, they were also subjected to bullying by unarmed commoners. They could neither eat nor sleep well. Where had they ever had to endure this kind of hardship back in Mount Luo? So they promptly chimed in and shouted, "Do it. We'll follow Big Bro Ding's lead." Pleased, Ding Niu laughed out loud. He nodded in satisfaction and said, "We all have brothers who have been captured by the Imperial Army. This revenge must be taken. If Xiao Qie dares to kill one of our men, we'll kill 10 of his to give vent to this wrath of ours. Who knows, when the time comes for us to take him captive and occupy the city of Xizhou, maybe even Xiao Jiming will try to cozy up to us." The bandits were in high spirits, and for a moment, everyone was talking all at once about the good life they would have after occupying the city of Xizhou. Ding Niu was on cloud 9 after being praised, and he increasingly felt confident that this plan would work. He was already thinking about bringing his younger sister over and finding her a husband, one who had to be better than the one who died. But then he had a better idea. This Xiao Qie works fine too. He was not only impressive looking, he was also taller than him, had a great physique, and came from a good family background. At this point, Ding Niu was already thinking about children and grandchildren. But then he saw the disciple on sentry duty at the foot of the mountain scrambling his way over. The latter's face was pale with fright as he announced, "The Imperial Army is here." Liu slipped his way into the blades of grasses, wanting to flee. Ding Niu grabbed this wily old fart, lifted him, and demanded with a glare, "You tipped the Imperial Army off." Liu hunched over, his long arms dangling, his white eyebrows almost trailing to the ground. He hurriedly shook his head and said, "Not me. How can it be me? I wouldn't have come if it were me." Ding Niu put Liu back on the ground. He steeled himself and said at the top of his voice, "Great. Since they have come calling at our door themselves, then we shall go and meet them." Lei Jingzhe spurred his horse on and galloped on the road. He had already skirted around the mountain forest at the east and was on his return trip back. More than half of the imperial army troops would be held up with Ding Niu, Liu, and the rest of the group as his cover, while the remaining had to stay behind to guard the southern side of Zizhou as well as the villages and towns along the way. He was the fish that had slipped through the net. Lei Jingzhe had only brought along the silly lad, Li Xiong. He did not want the rest of them. It was not because he trusted Li Xiong that he was willing to take him along, but because this lad was silly enough, and Lei Jingzhe had single-handedly brought him up all by himself. Li Xiong was the most obedient lad, and Lei Jingzhe could tell what he was thinking at a mere glance. Lei Jingzhe rode a horse, while Li Xiong ran on foot. He ran with great vigor and had no trouble keeping up as he followed behind Lei Jingzhe's horse. They had already been running all night, and Li Xiong was still naively waiting to meet up with the rest of them. "Take a drink of water." Lei Jingzhe tossed the water bag to Li Xiong as he reined in his horse. "We won't be resting en route today." Li Xiong opened the lid and gulped down more than half of it in one breath. On seeing this, Lei Jingzhe cursed. "You stupid brat. If you drink it all up now, then what are you going to drink at night? You're going to keep whining about wanting to pee later with this much water in your stomach." Li Xiong wiped his mouth with a smile and patted his stomach. He said, "I won't, bro. It'll be gone after a run." Lei Jingzhe hung the water bag back on the horse's back. He asked, "Are you hungry?" Li Xiong shook his head and said, "I stuffed myself so much last night that I'm still full. We'll be able to eat meat once we're back in Mount Luo." Thus, Lei Jingzhe did not linger further and continued hurrying on his way with Li Xiong in tow. They had helpers in Dunju, and the Dunju relay station could pass on his message to deploy the bandit soldiers who were still guarding Mount Luo. Lei Jingzhe was in such a hurry because he still had some misgivings. He wanted to arrive before news of Ding Niu, Liu, and the others' capture made its way back. Otherwise, should the news arrive first, half of the trust and reputation he had built up throughout the year in Mount Luo would fall into shambles. By then, it would not be as easy as it was now to deploy the men. The road checks along the way gradually grew lax until it was not as strict as it had been within 10 li or so around Bianshui town. The number of the imperial army troops grew fewer and fewer. By the time Lei Jingzhe passed by the vegetable fields manned by troops, he could no longer see any signs of the imperial army. At night, they rested by the side of a stream. Li Xiong speared a few fishes and roasted them for Lei Jingzhe to consume. Without seasonings or herbs, these fishes were fishy and bitter to the taste. But Li Xiong ate them with relish and fell on his back to sleep after eating his fill. Lei Jingzhe did not dare to leave the campfire behind, so he covered it with soil. Gradually finding it harder to hang on as he had not had any sleep for a day and a night, he leaned against a tree and fell asleep. Lei Jingzhe slept for an unspecified amount of time before he was startled awake. He propped himself up on the ground, stilled his breathing, and listened to signs of activity within the forest with rapt attention. The wind was a little strong tonight. Tree branches swayed from the force of it, rustling the leaves in intermittent bursts. Li Xiong was still sleeping, his snores thunderous. Lei Jingzhe listened for a long time. Although he could not see anything amiss, he was already starting to feel suspicious. He kicked Li Xiong awake and gestured with his hands for Li Xiong to get the horse. As Li Xiong untied the reins, he suddenly had the urge to relieve himself. He never stopped for a break in the morning, and he had fallen right asleep at night. Unable to hold it in, he whispered to Lei Jingzhe, "Bro, I want to pee." Lei Jingzhe clicked his tongue and made a gesture as if he was going to thrash him, then motioned for him to hurry. So Li Xiong went behind the tree and loosened his waist sash. The sound of water splashing rang out. Having seen no signs of movement so far, Lei Jingzhe relaxed a little. He pulled the horse, and when the horse snorted, he suddenly realized something off. Why was there not even a chirp from the birds or insects? Li Xiong was not done relieving himself when he heard Lei Jingzhe hissed. "Leave!" Li Xiong exclaimed in acknowledgement, then tied his waist sash in a hurry and broke into a run after him. Lei Jingzhe lashed out hard with his horsewhip and charged at random among the shadows of the trees. The tree forks swaying in the wind loomed like demons, brandishing their claws and baring their fangs as they came surrounding him from all sides. Lei Jingzhe fled until he was sweating. He did not know why he was sweating. His back had gone all cold from the wind. He did not even care to look back at Li Xiong, he only wanted to leave this forest as fast as possible. The horse under him was already exhausted from the running. No matter how he whipped it, it did not run as fast as it did in the daytime. The sounds of footsteps came trampling noisily towards him. It was as if Lei Jingzhe was being chased by some gargantuan behemoth. He crashed headlong through the net of trees and charged out of the forest, but following right after, he forcibly reined in the horse and gasped for breath as he looked fixedly ahead. The hem of Xiao Qie's clothes fluttered backward in the wind. The gerfalcon was perched on his shoulder, its head tilted to the side. Darkness seemed to spread out from behind him. It weighed down heavily on Lei Jingzhe's limbs, swallowing them and rendering him immobile. His entire body was frozen stiff on the back of the horse. A raspy sound escaped from Lei Jingzhe's throat. He snapped back to his senses and thought of turning around, but the imperial army was all around him. Xiao Qie had deliberately hidden his men in the forest. As a result, Lei Jingzhe could not guess how many men he had brought along. This was a counterblow to Lei Jingzhe's initial deception, so that Lei Jingzhe would similarly experience the absurdity of being played. "Go ahead and run," Xiao Qie said in a deep voice. Lei Jingzhe released the reins and put both hands up. He said, "You win. I concede defeat." Lang Dao Shuijin threw its head back and neighed. Xiao Qie said nothing. Lei Jingzhe slid off his horse slowly, keeping both hands up to indicate that he had no thoughts of fighting it out to the death. He seemed to be very well aware of the situation. After landing on the ground, he removed the broadsword at the side of his waist and looked at Xiao Qie as he bent over to put it on the ground. Then he said, "We can still talk." His interest piqued. Xiao Qie said, "Go on." Lei Jingzhe calmed his panting. Surrounded by the cold glints of blades, and with beads of sweat dripping from his temples, he said, "You're going back to Lebei, so you won't reside in Xizhou for long. Killing me now won't stop the Mount Luo bandits from making a comeback. Instead, it will plunge Dunju and Duanzhou, which have only just stabilized, back into chaos. Why not let me go to keep the situation in both prefectures stable and give Xizhou enough time to rebuild its garrison troops?" The cawing of a crow rang out from the sky. Meng braced itself. With a spread of its wings, it took to the air, glided through the wind, and swooped into the billowing trees. The atmosphere at the bottom subsequently grew tense. Lei Jingzhe kept looking at Xiao Qie all this while, as if to prove that he was confident of success, that it was not the end of the road for him yet. Xiao Qie lifted a hand and laid his palm at the side of his waist. Both men stood facing each other. In the very instant Meng pounced and ripped into the crow, Lei Jingzhe abruptly kicked up his broadsword and flung off its sheath. He rolled forward. With a strong burst of strength in his legs, he sprang up high into the air and cleaved the broadsword down towards Xiao Qie right in the face. Blade collided violently against blade, sending sparks sputtering as they scraped against each other in a mighty show of power. The scorching weather that had persisted for several days dissipated in the wind. Skies that were still clear and boundless in the morning were now overcast with dark clouds. A few bean-sized raindrops came pelting down, followed by the sudden arrival of a rainstorm, as if heaven could not bear the heat and had sent it to scour the filthy world. Li Xiong, who had lost track of Lei Jingzhe, circled around for a long time before he finally heard the subtle sounds of fighting in the rain. He brushed aside the branches and leaves with all his might and trampled upon muddied water as he chased his way towards the sound. The moment he rolled out, he came right in front of the Imperial army wielding their blades. He was unarmed, but in a moment of desperation when he saw Lei Jingzhe in a disadvantageous position under the curtain of rain, he bellowed and turned around to wrap his arms around a bare, withered tree as thick as the rim of a bowl and swung it up. Bro! Like a strong, charging bull of limitless strength, Li Xiong sent the Imperial army on one side scattering all over in total disarray. Xiao Qie did not expect Li Xiong to have such strength. He swung away from the trajectory of the tree Li Xiong was brandishing. Lei Jingzhe, who had already been struck with the blade, saw his opportunity and retreated immediately to Li Xiong's side. Li Xiong's extraordinary strength was innate, and it was even more terrifying than Xiao Qie's. He swung the tree to ward off all those blades and swords and shouted, "Bro, I'll carry you on my back." Lei Jingzhe jumped onto Li Xiong's back. Supporting the tree, Li Xiong bellowed and charged a path out of the encirclement. He was not afraid of blades and swords, and he did not fear Xiao Qie either. Newborn calves were all of such a temperament. There was only his big brother Lei Jingzhe in his eyes. Li Xiong did not even feel the pain when he was slashed in the arms. He kicked over the wall of people before him and broke into a mad dash in the torrential rain with Lei Jingzhe on his back. Blood dripped off Lei Jingzhe, staining Li Xiong's back red. Li Xiong wiped his face and cried, "Bro, don't die." Lei Jingzhe was not a person who would simply resign to his fate. He did not have a pleasant time back in the Zhu clan in Duanzhou. His father failed his mother, so he changed his surname and called himself Lei Jingzhe from then on. He ran into danger many times on Mount Luo, and he had always been able to wait for things to take a turn for the better. But Xiao Qie was just like the sudden rain that came out of nowhere this night. He was the edge of a precipice he had never foreseen. He thought it should not be the end of him just yet he could only watch as the turns of events tipped the balance against him. "Damn it," covering his wound, Lei Jingzhe said, "Shut up." Li Xiong listened to the sound of horse hooves behind him and dashed off with his teeth clenched and his face tilted up. This lad was truly unusual, even ordinary horses could not catch up to him. But Xiao Qie's Lang Dao Shuejin was extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, it had already caught up right behind them. Li Xiong did his best, but as he leaped across the stream, he suddenly cramped up. He was still growing, and he lost his balance when he landed on his feet. Consequently, he fell. As he sucked in a breath from the pain, he dragged Lei Jingzhe up, still intending to carry him on his back to flee. "Xiao Qie." Knowing that there was no escape for him, Lei Jingzhe said, "If you are willing to spare me, then it's possible for the bandits of Mount Luo to come under your command. I still have some influence left. I can still be of some use." Xiao Qie flung away the drops of blood on Longli blade. Lang Dao Shuejin stamped its hooves twice before it broke into a sudden run. Lei Jingzhe twisted Li Xiong's face over. There was already a change in the timbre of his voice amidst his violent gasps. He did not want to die. His grip tightened on Li Xiong's hand as he said, "Xiong's eye one, kill him, kill him." Li Xiong rubbed away the rainwater on his face. With one limping leg, he spread both arms open and stabilized his lower body, wanting to throw off Lang Dao Shuejin. With his sturdy body trembling, he looked at Xiao Qie, then let loose a bellow and charged over. He wrapped his arms around Lang Dao Shuejin's neck, causing Lang Dao Shuejin to neigh. He did not know too many martial art moves, but there was a flash of his leg in what was clearly a wrestling technique of the Bianxia tribes as he flung Lang Dao Shuejin over into the muddy water. Xiao Qie grabbed Li Xiong, who had a youthful-looking face, up by the collar. As the latter struggled and pounded on Xiao Qie's arms, he shouted, "Bro, run." Hauling Li Xiong along, Xiao Qie watched as Lei Jingzhe rolled down the muddy slope. He did not give chase. Li Xiong made to bite him with his teeth, and Xiao Qie wrung his back collar to hurl him right to the ground face first so that his nose and mouth were stuffed into the mud puddle, choking him until he was violently struggling all over. "Tie him up." Li Xiong heard Xiao Qie say to the Imperial Army, who had arrived later. And then he was knocked unconscious with the back of a blade. The rainstorm stopped after a while. Tantai, who arrived from behind on horseback. Xiao Qie just happened to be wiping the mud off Lang Dao Shuejin's body. When he saw Tantai Hu, he removed the half-arm fabric sleeve used for wiping with one hand and beckoned to Tantai Hu. "Master." Tantai Hu said, "I'll lead the men to outflank him from the southeastern side right away. He won't be able to run far." But Xiao Qie asked him, "Have all the bandits in the forest been captured?" Tantai, who thought that Xiao Qie wanted to do a head count and was ready to turn back to get his subordinate to bring over the book. But unexpectedly, Xiao Qie said as he wiped away the mud on his fingers, "It's all good as long as you've caught them. There's no need to show me. Go get ready. We're returning to the city." Tantai, who was taken aback. Seeing that Xiao Qie had already picked up the saddle to put it on Lang Dao Shuejin, He walked a few steps with him and said, "Master, isn't letting him go just like this akin to letting the tiger return to the mountains and setting the stage for future disasters?" As Xiao Qie wiped the mud on the saddle, he said, "I'm not only going to let him go, I'm going to send him off with great fanfare. Get a few squads of men to follow him. He has been stabbed, don't let him die on the way. Send him all the way into Duanzhou's territory. There's no need to bother about the other matters." Tantai, who only had to use his brain a little to understand his intent. He grinned and said, "Then I'll go. Master, I'll bring dozens of men. I'll be sure to escort him back to Dunzhou within 3 days." Xiao Qie looked on with cool detachment in the direction where Lei Jingzhe had fled. A dripping wet meng landed back on his shoulder and combed through its blood-stained feathers. Xiao Qie used the handkerchief that he had used to wipe the mud from Langdao Shuejin to clean Meng's talons. He said, "Lift it properly. I'll wipe them clean for you. Otherwise, if you see Lanju upon returning and trample mud all over his shoulders, I'll have to wash his robe." Chapter 116, Chen Yang. Chapter 116, Chen Yang. If Xiao Qie said he would return in 3 days, then he would return in 3 days. When he hurried back to the foot of Zizhou's city gates in the middle of the night, the city gates had already been opened, with torches brightly illuminating the city walls. The imperial army held the captives in line and entered. Zhu Gui had cleared out the prison in the south for the imperial army to hold these bandits in custody. He received Xiao Qie and said, "Your lordship has been working hard. The soldiers are tired after having eradicated the bandits. I've already gotten men to prepare meals for all. Everyone, this way, please." Xiao Qie dismounted and said, "Thank you, Your Excellency, for going to the trouble." Zhu Gui followed Xiao Qie in and said with a radiant expression, "I saw General Tantai's report that the bandits have been taken captive in the east. They have been completely disbanded. And your lordship personally went after Lei Jingzhe. This is truly, truly marvelous." Xiao Qie had already caught sight of Shen Zichuan, and Shen Zichuan had also seen Xiao Qie. A few guards were following behind Shen Zichuan, and Xiao Tianya was carrying a lantern in hand. They had obviously been waiting for a long time. Still speaking to Zhu Gui, he said, "I shall have a detailed discussion regarding Lei Jingzhe with Your Excellency in the study tomorrow morning." Zhu Gui thought Xiao Qie was tired from being on the go, so he hurriedly nodded and said, "Sure." Kong Ling was more perceptive than him. Although he was not used to it, he also knew that they were getting in the way, so he threw out a random excuse and led Zhu Gui away. Chen Yang stepped forward to take the horse. The guards behind all kneeled on one knee and said, "Congratulations to Master on your triumphant return." Xiao Qie undid his arm guards and took off the conqueror bow and said, "You may rise. Have you been waiting long?" Shen Zichuan took the lantern over from Xiao Tianya and turned around to walk with Xiao Qie along the street. He answered, "Quite a while." Xiao Qie lowered his fingers and took the lantern over from Shen Zichuan's hand, while Shen Zichuan took the arm guard Xiao Qie had just taken off to look it over. On seeing this, Xiao Qie said, "These are old stuff from a few years back. The metal was cast by Li Bei, and the leather strings on top were supplied to the 8 great training divisions right from Kudu. It came apart from the chafing the last time I drew the conqueror bow here. I'll think of a way to replace it before I return to Li Bei." The leather strings used for binding on the arm guards were indeed worn out. Shen Zichuan hooked it several times and said to Xiao Tianya, "Take it and put it aside first." Noting that both of them were moving in the wrong direction, Xiao Qie could not help but cast a sidelong glance where the Jew's residence was. Then he looked at Shen Zichuan and said, "Have we moved out?" "Of course, we have to move out." Shen Zichuan went up the stairs. It's not convenient to keep staying in Zhu Gui's residence. He just had a grandson at the beginning of the year, and his entire family is crammed into 2 courtyards. It's too much of an inconvenience to them. I had someone ask around a few days ago, and it just so happened that a residence here caught my eye. Both of them had already entered the wide alley as he spoke. The slabstone path led right to the main entrance. Xiao Qie sized it up and said, "It's next to the main street, and it's close to Zhu Gui's residence. It'll be convenient to discuss matters during normal hours. You've chosen an excellent location. There's a drawback." Shun Zechuan said as he led Xiao Qie across the threshold. It's too big. The smattering of men we have aren't even enough to fill up these few courtyards. Xiao Qie saw a horse platform one made up of stacked bricks set up before the residence. The wooden carved door pillars were crude, and its patterns were not as fine and meticulous as the ones in Kudu and Jueshi. Rather, it was more the style of Libei and Biancha. 5 courtyards in a compound were really too big for both of them. When Qi Hualien was still the grand mentor of the Eastern Palace, the residence he had been bestowed upon was about the same size as this. They would not be able to fill it up even with the addition of servants. Besides, both of them had no heirs or concubines. The stone walls looked a little old, but the double-eaved roof cut an imposing sight. It did not obstruct the light either. It was just the way Xiao Qie liked it. No issues there. Xiao Qie stepped through the door and held Shun Zichuan by the hand. Shifu can take one courtyard, while you and I can share a courtyard. The few of them buddies can have a courtyard. If more people join us in the future, we can split them up according to status. There will be a day we get to see it filled up when we are 70 or 80 years old. The backyard is empty, Shun Zichuan said. But we will need to add men to the rear yard and the side rooms flanking the principal room. These courtyards are all connected to one another, so it won't do for us not to have someone keep watch. It'll be a bit more troublesome when they are on shift duty. As both of them were at the head discussing what they should acquire in the future, Ding Dao was at the back recording down the routes in his book. He whispered, although this residence is not as big as our prince's residence in Kudu, it is too circuitous. If I were to live at the back, it would take me half a month just to remember the directions. What are you afraid of since we don't let you take up a mission alone? And you always have Jiyu Jin around to lead you. Qiao Tianya said. This residence isn't cheap, but my master doesn't even blink an eye at the price. He sure has deep pockets. With a sorrowful expression, Ding Dao wrote a few more words and said, you don't understand. It's precisely because Jiyu Jin is leading that we will get lost. Sigh, Jinji is really a strange one. As a scout in the military, he can remember all those unfamiliar places clearly when he's investigating matters outside, but not so when he returns to our own home. 8 or 9 times out of 10, he will turn into the wrong courtyard. Back at home in Libei, he will often end up somewhere else. I'm telling you, there's an older sister in that residence called Tsuelan, a maidservant of the consort of the hereditary prince. She's really gentle. Every time Jinji makes a wrong turn, she's the one who leads him back. She even gives me candy. In any case, Hamp has Jekyll. Jiyu Jin clamped an arm around Ding Dao and gagged his mouth shut. He cast a few glances at Qiao Tianya and said, hear no evil. I haven't heard any part that's evil. Qiao Tianya looked astonished and applauded softly. On the other hand though, you have just shot yourself in the foot. It's hard to plant bamboo here. I'll look for others after a few days. Xiao Qie looked back and said to the few of them, who is on the night watch tonight? All this while, Chen Yang seemed to be preoccupied, but on hearing him, he said, I'm on guard alone. The few of them are on shift duty these few days. Xiao Qie knew from this that Chen Yang had something to report to him, so he nodded and did not ask further. He already knew that there was an issue when he entered the city and saw Chen Yang's expression as the latter received him. The hot water was ready when he returned to the courtyard. During the interval Xiao Qie was taking a bath, Shun Zichuan got someone to warm up the meal. The weather was hot, and the doors to the principal room were wide open with bamboo blinds hung up to keep out mosquitoes. The window screens were all newly replaced, and there was a round-bellied copper vat placed on the veranda with 2 red carps in the clear water and 3 or 4 lotuses floating on it. Several green plants that had been planted in the courtyard were bathed under the warm light emanating from the room. They clustered around Chen Yang, who was sitting in a daze. Chen Yang was wearing an old robe. Their clothes had all worn out after they rushed the entire journey here. Shun Zechuan had asked Zhu Gui's principal wife to look for a tailor to take their measurements one by one. After a period of time, they would all have new sets of clothes to change into. Chen Yang and Zhao Hui were of the same age. But Zhao Hui already had a family and an established career, while he was still a head of guards who lived together with the other brothers. He seemed to be the most sophisticated of them, but in truth, he was also rough around the edges. He was sitting under the eaves at present, getting quite a number of bites from the mosquitoes. Yet he felt troubled as he continued to deliberate over how he should report to Xiao Qie in a while. The bamboo blinds opened up partially. Shun Zichuan had already changed into his regular clothes. He said to Chen Yang, "You've been guarding the city wall entrance at night, and you still want to sit here and let the mosquitoes feast on you. Come in and have dinner with Xian first." Chen Yang rose to his feet in compliance and followed him in. Xiao Qie had yet to come out. The meal was very simple. They rarely had lavish meals. Now that Ji Gang was back, he kept a tight watch on their food. All the ingredients to be used and nourishments to be taken were arranged according to the recipes he and Qi Hualian had decided on back at Zhaozue Temple. The few of them guards loved to drink, as did Ji Gang back in the past, and the dishes he made to go with wine were exceptional. Chen Yang sat on his knees on the mat, and the maidservant set the dishes on the small table in front of him. It was quiet inside the room. Chen Yang sat with his head lowered and listened as she withdrew out of the room. Shun Zichuan sat at the head. He was not as restrained as Chen Yang was. The wide, white robe he was wearing shifted along with his moments and revealed his wrists, consequently diminishing some of the exquisiteness his appearance had given him. Instead, there was something relaxingly unpretentious about it. If both of them were to remain here together for long, perhaps they would both end up subconsciously affected by the other. Shun Zichuan at this moment felt to Chen Yang like Xiao Qie when he was quiet. They both gave off a vibe that could gradually put one at ease. Contrary to expectations, it won't do you any good to worry too much. Shun Zichuan set down the wooden chopsticks and said without looking at Chen Yang, "Just report according to the facts. No embellishment, no rephrasing. Tell him as it is. He will naturally have his own thinking." It is often said that those deeply involved in a matter often lack the detachment to see the whole picture. But in truth, that's not necessarily so. As the one involved, he understands it far more than anyone else. He has perhaps even thought of it way earlier than you did. With his head lowered, Chen Yang bowed to him in silence. If you underestimate him, then you are underestimating yourself. Shun Zichuan said unhurriedly. He chose all of you out of millions of people, but didn't all of you also choose him out of millions of people too? There will still be rainstorms to brave and turbulent seas to navigate in the future. If you are going to keep hesitating and wavering like you are tonight every single time for every single matter, then, sooner or later, you will not be able to keep up with his pace. They only recognize the Xiao Qie of 6 years ago. But what you are seeing is a Xiao Qie that has been tempered over these 6 years to the way he is now. Chen Yang and Zhao Hui are both the sunlight too, and Xiao Qie and Xiao Jiming are both the wolves of Libei. So what are you still afraid of? Don't let your time in Kudu befuddle you. All of you have long been on par with them. Chen Yang sat on the mat with his head lowered, and an indistinct sob escaped his throat as his fingers curled slightly. He did not say a word for a long time. He thought his own matters were of no importance, so he did not mention it. Although he did not suffer a gross injustice like Ji Yujin, he could still sense the cold treatment he had been given back at home. He had been tossing and turning these few days precisely because he did not know how to bring it up to Xiao Qie. He was even secretly relieved when he left Libei with Ji Yujin. When Chen Yang left Libei, he was in no way inferior to Zhao Hui. He always tried to win credit in every matter, as he was the most fearful of being perceived as being inferior to Zhao Hui, so he kept raising the bar for himself. But when he went back to stay for half a month, he unexpectedly had the notion to avoid Zhao Hui. He was afraid. At some point, he thought he had already lost. He was Xiao Qie's trusted aide, and also an aspect that others would use to compare Xiao Qie and Xiao Jiming. The moment he started to harbor such a fear, then Ji Yujin and Ding Dao, who were the next in line, would inevitably be affected too. They would no longer be able to be placed on par with Xiao Jiming's guards. To a Xiao Qie who was about to fall under the harsh scrutiny of Libei, this was a heavy blow. Xiao Qie was not anyone else. He was not Xiao Fengshu, nor was he Xiao Jiming. He was his own person. His most arrogant traits were his fearlessness in forging ahead and determination to win. For Chen Yang, following him would be just like chasing after the tempestuous wind. Shun Zichuan was right. If Chen Yang were to feel fear at this point in time, then he would, sooner or later, be left behind. Because the one he had chosen at the very start was a Xiao Qie who had the guts to remain all alone by himself in Kudu. Xiao Qie's hair was still wet when he emerged with his regular clothes draped around him. He could not help but be taken aback when he saw Chen Yang bent over the ground with his shoulders trembling. He looked at Shun Zechuan, who spread his hands out slightly and gave him an innocent look. Chapter 117, Favor and Amp, Intimidation. Chapter 117, Favor and Amp, Intimidation. Xiao Qie's loose outer robe was half opened, revealing the unclosed collar of his inner garment. When he sat down, he blocked off much of the light. There was still moisture on his body, and he felt a little more comfortable after wiping his face with a clean handkerchief. He then rapped a bent finger thrice on the floor and said to Chen Yang, "What's the matter? Sit up and talk." Chen Yang promptly rubbed his face clean with his arm and sat straight up. He said, "We encountered some incidents during this return trip to Libei. I'm reporting to Master first, as I do not dare to make a decision arbitrarily." Xiao Qie picked up Shun Zechuan's chopsticks and listened as Chen Yang recapped what happened. Shun Zechuan left the table midway to take a bath. Xiao Qie finished the rice in his bowl and sat for a moment without showing any intent to ask for another helping. He asked, "How is Jiyu Jin's injury? We called for a physician after we left Changzhou camp. Jiyu Jin's fever subsided during the journey, but the wound on his back is festering badly. Ji Gangshifu took a look at it last night and told Jiyu Jin to abstain from certain foods. He also gave him instructions on several matters and said that he would be able to recover if he recuperates for about a month." At this point, Chen Yang paused for a moment before continuing. Fortunately, his eyes and ears were not hurt. Jiyu Jin's eyesight and hearing far exceeded that of the average person. It was a one-of-a-kind natural talent among these guards. This matter would be a lot harder to resolve had he been wounded in his eyes and ears. If that happened, then even Xiao Qie would not be able to swallow this injustice, let alone Chen Yang. Tudalong Banner is a domain the Changzhou camp of the Eastern Mountain Range would patrol daily. It's originally quite a distance away from the Hanshi tribe. To think Jiyu Jin's vanguard squad actually retreated all the way there. Xiao Qie had gathered plenty from Chen Yang's statements. He said astutely, "This shows that the Libei armored cavalry has been retreating. The battles Father and Shifu are fighting aren't going smoothly." The insect's cries on summer nights created quite the din as it drifted through the bamboo curtains, and it was so hot both inside and outside the room that it made one restless. Xiao Qie looked at the candle flame for a moment and said in a hushed tone, "Eldest brother's incapability to lead the troops is a heavy blow to Libei armored cavalry. Father promptly came out of retirement to boost the troops' plunging morale and soften the impact of the word defeat. But he has not been on the battlefield in person for nearly 15 years. On the other hand, his opponent, Amua, has never left the front line of the Hanshi tribe in these 15 years. Times have changed. Relying blindly on Father is not the way to victory. I often say not to have a change of people right before the battle. Even the best general has to build up a rapport with his soldiers over time. All of Father's troops 15 years ago have been replaced, and those who can stage a comeback with him are few and far between. The ones he is leading now are a new school of military officers and soldiers who are already used to eldest brother's style of handling matters. Both sides need to mutually adjust to each other during a critical battle, and this is not an easy thing to achieve. When Xiao Fengshu established the Libei armored cavalry, the word armored cavalry was the best description of the Libei army. At that time, Libei was unable to catch up with the Biancha cavalry's horses, so Xiao Fengshu adopted the measure of making them heavier. He not only had the soldiers all armored up, but even the horses of Libei too. Such an army was a terrifying force to behold in a frontal assault. Like the mighty torrents of the mountains, the impact of the collision was able to annihilate their foes in a blink of an eye. There was simply no time for the Biancha cavalry to draw their machetes, and even if they did, they could not stab through those armors. Even the ferocious Hanshi tribe was not willing to fight a drawn-out war with the armored cavalry. Their light and swift mobility was their only remaining advantage. And it was on this basis that Xiao Fengshu kept piling on more weight to armor up the Libai armored cavalry until he eventually forged the Libai armored cavalry into a real wall of iron. When Qi Zhuyin led the Chidong garrison troops through the territory, the sounds of their horses' hooves boomed like thunder. But when the Libai armored cavalry did the same, the sound they generated was not just like thunder, but real thunderclaps. That weight could make one lose the courage to continue fighting just from the sound of it alone, so much to the extent that no one could find the Libai armored cavalry's weakness for as long as 5 or 6 years. However, Amur was also a fearless warrior who, among his constant engagement with the Libai armored cavalry, made use of their heaviness to the fullest. As long as the Hanshi tribe's cavalry was fast enough, they would be able to loot, retreat, disperse, detour back, and encircle the foe in that order, like a swarm of blood-sucking flies that, despite being unable to penetrate through those solid and sturdy armors, would also emerge unscathed. The way Lei Jingzhe gathered the bandits together to harass the imperial army was precisely an imitation of the Hanshi tribe's way of combating the Libai armored cavalry. It was just that Lei Jingzhe did not have horses that fast, nor soldiers that strong. It was at this time that Xiao Jiming took over the Libai armored cavalry. The first decision he faced back then was whether to retain the weight of the Libai armored cavalry. In the eyes of the veteran generals, he was a lad who was still wet behind the ears, and his refined and humble personality was one aspect of him that the veterans who were used to Xiao Fengshu could not stand. He made a completely different choice from Xiao Fengshu. He reduced the weight of the Libai armored cavalry, making the wall of iron thinner, but equipping it with the mobility to turn around quickly. And thus, the Libai armored cavalry shifted from being a heavy cavalry into a cavalry that veered towards being a little more armored up. It was with this change that Libai began to possess the characteristic of fast. This was where River of Ice armored cavalry originated from, and it was also the fundamental reason he was able to stride across the borders of 2 territories in one night. They were able to keep up with the Hanshi tribe's speed. Coupled with the constant refining of their battle formations, they became even tougher to deal with. The new school of generals was all selected by Xiao Jiming. Their working style was mutually compatible with Xiao Jiming's, and they were already used to Xiao Jiming's receptiveness to their suggestions. Perhaps they respected Xiao Fengshu just the same on an emotional level, but they might not necessarily be able to adapt to Xiao Fengshu. Respect alone could not win them battles. The light in their eyes as they looked up to the legendary god of war would be worn down again and again as they mutually butted heads with one another. In the end, the glorious Prince of Libai would also fall off the pedestal on which he had been placed on to become a myth that had faded into obscurity along with the tides of change. When that time came, the legend of the Libai armored cavalry would also come to an end. They would become a bunch of disorganized soldiers plagued by mutual discord and internal strife among themselves. A concentrated force excessively dependent on a centralized command was an advantage, but it was also a shortcoming. Qi Zhuyin was the commander-in-chief who had intensively studied the Libai armored cavalry the most. She was very well aware of the drawbacks in the Libai armored cavalry's reliance on its commanding officer. That was why she had been trying her best to avoid leading Chidong down the same route as the Libai armored cavalry after she became the commander-in-chief of the Chidong 5 Commandery's military forces. She went all out to establish the Chidong General's Barrack, which took in men who had the potential and the making to lead troops. It was her confidence in her hold over absolute military power and authority that she dared to delegate authority to these men. She gave Lu Guangbai this much authority because Lu Guangbai had the capability. She understood what kind of generals were suitable to lead what kind of squads. In Xiao Qie's eyes, Qi Zhuyin was the most qualified person among their generation to be the commander-in-chief. People who could fight could be the general of an army, but they might not necessarily be able to be a commander-in-chief commanding armies from all quarters. If one were to rank the 4 great generals of the world, no doubt Qi Zhuyin would be the chief. She had long come to discern the Libai armored cavalry's weakness, and she had reminded Xiao Jiming of it. Xiao Qie's ostracization was inevitable. With one hand on his knee, Xiao Qie poured the melted candle wax into the small porcelain plate. The tips of his fingers came into contact with it, but he liked this kind of searing pain. He watched as the candlelight flickered and said, "Chen Yang, when I left home at 17, I asked my eldest sister-in-law when I would be able to return home. This question brought tears to her eyes, and she cried the entire night alone in her room. When my eldest brother and I got on the horses, she stuffed many cakes from Libe into my bundle one and even hid a flask of on horseback too within. She said she didn't know when I would be able to return home either, but they would always be waiting for me in Libe. I entered the capital as a hostage because my eldest brother won a victory in battle. I hate Shenwei to the core. At that time, I thought the defeat of the Zhongbo troops was to be blamed. I never thought of myself to be more outstanding than my eldest brother, but I was equally attached to Hongyang Mountains and the racecourses. I used to lie prone on the ground and listen to the sounds from the lands of Libe. When I left, I even wanted to take the soil of Libe along with me. I attempted to survey the horizons for a glimpse of Libe from the top of the tallest building in Kudu, but even Meng could not see it when it flew up into the clouds. It was then I understood for the first time how much of a remote possibility it was to return home. I've learned plenty from Shifu, but it was only when I was in Kudu that I began to understand the truths behind those words. I am a man burning with ambitions, and Kudu is the teacher that taught me to restrain all those desires. My encounter with Lanju did not happen by accident. He was the last line of defense when I was about to hit my limit and lose it. He is also the indulgence and freedom I lost and regained. Xiao Qie lifted a finger, as if he had drawn a line. I am complete. The parts of me that were broken and lacking are now encased with steel. I would no longer stop when I walked out of Kudu again. Whether it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago, my father and eldest brother both made the best choice, and now, it's my turn. The mountain we surmount might not necessarily remain our foes forever. I acknowledge how outstanding my father and eldest brother are. I revere and cherish them, but that is the part that belongs to family, not the Libe armored cavalry. We are wolves that have strayed from the pack. Our return to the pack is not for us to submit and bow to the commands of others, but to carve out our own place and positions among them. Xiao Qie bent over slightly, his gaze as sharp as a blade. Libe cannot suffer another defeat. This isn't a matter of the Xiao clan. I understand that, as do my father and eldest brother. Who should inherit this iron wall? Anyone. As long as he can shoulder the responsibility. I'm going back to Libe, not just going home. Guo Weili is a veteran of Libe. He knows all of your functions best, and not injuring Jiyu Jin's eyes and ears is the most merciful warning he is giving me. So cheer up, Chen Yang. Our opponents are all the battle-hardened seniors who have been fighting on the battlefield for a long time. There is no battle in this world that must be lost. All those impregnable defenses and impenetrable encirclements are but facades. I'm going back. I want a Libe armored cavalry that truly belongs to me. Chen Yang's fingertips trembled slightly. Xiao Qie's words had him all fired up. He had been sitting on his knees until his legs had both gone numb, but that tingling sensation leaped up his spine as he faced such a Xiao Qie, his fear all swept away by the fervor coursing through his blood. By the time Shun Zichuan emerged from his bath, Chen Yang had already taken his leave and left the room. Xiao Qie was lying on the Shumi couch 3 staring into space. The windows were open, and there was a porcelain jar on the veranda with a few stalks of lotuses in it. Their delicate fragrance wafted through the gaps. Xiao Qie rested his head on an arm and looked up at the starry night sky. The breeze of summer nights was always so gentle, coming and going without a trace. One could barely feel it if not for the scent of lotuses permeating the air. Xiao Qie was not only feeling hot, he was also weary. However, he had his own pride. He was unwilling to show his fatigue easily, so he could only stuff these feelings into these sleepy moments as he stared into nothing and pretended not to be tired at all. The sky was studded with stars this night. He was in a bit of a trance. Shun Zichuan blew out the candle and threw his outer robe on the back of a chair. He scraped an icy cold finger gently across Xiao Qie's cheek, leaving in its path a temperature that belied excitement. Xiao Qie returned to his senses and locked gazes with him. Even though he had just showered, Shun Zichuan's fingers were still icy cold. That icy cold finger brushed across Xiao Qie's cheek, as if comforting him. Xiao Qie tilted his head a little to the side to be a little closer to Shun Zichuan's palm. Xiao Qie really missed Shun Zichuan. This kind of longing was fervent and urgent, but it was not strange. Every inch of his body missed Shen Zichuan. This was a common occurrence. However, this longing was not just limited to his physical self, it was also the desire raging in his heart. It was a love far deeper and much more indescribable. He felt an unprecedented excitement lying in wait behind all of this fatigue. Shen Zichuan sensed his rising temperature. Xiao Qie had been on horseback for days, but he was unable to fall asleep right now. Only both of them understood the intrusive look in his eyes, which hardened along with the movements of Shen Zichuan's finger. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. In the near future, there would be countless of such absences. And now, Xiao Qie wanted to possess every single moment they were alone together. He suspected that vines would sprout out of the longing in his chest and wound around the armored hooves on which he raced across the grasslands, holding him back. He wanted to invade Shen Zichuan, penetrating deep into him again and again, and in the process, leave his own scent on him. Not only that, he also wanted to be filled with Shen Zichuan's scent. Both of them had to have the same scent. This was a childish obsession of the wolf pup. It was as if doing so would prove that they could never be apart. Xiao Qie pressed his cheek against Shen Zichuan's palm, sniffing his scent before the small furrow in his brows finally relaxed. Xiao Qie wanted to tell Shen Zichuan how much he truly loved him. Perhaps there were many ways to express love. But now, he only wanted to use the most intense kind. The Shumi couch was not big enough for both of them. Xiao Qie reached out to pull down the bamboo blinds and covered up that bit of gap in the window, shutting the moon outside. Lanju did not need the moonlight. That naked, lithe softness of his only needed one person's gaze on him, Xiao Qie's. Shen Zichuan rode on Xiao Qie as they kissed in the darkness. Their hot breaths intertwining inseparably together, its heat edging all the way down to their necks, chests, and even abdomens. Shen Zichuan's neck was flushed all over. Xiao Qie felt this to be some kind of silent acclamation. It was also Lanzu's indulgence. As with Shen Zichuan's tremblings, these were all urgings Xiao Qie could not rein in. Xiao Qie's ferocity caused Shen Zichuan to lift his head and gasp for breath. Shen Zichuan pressed down on Xiao Qie's chest and attempted to make him stop this aggressive invasion. But he was also looking down at Xiao Qie with tears in his eyes, seducing Xiao Qie with his gaze into continuing with the fierceness, into keeping up with the meanness. Do all you want. This was what the expression in Shen Zichuan's eyes was explicitly telling Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie was brimming with energy as he held Shen Zichuan securely on top of him. He was panting. Neither of them averted their eyes, as if they could not bear to look away from each other for even a moment. Shen Zichuan's hair gradually scattered all over his shoulders amidst the intense thrusting. He clenched Xiao Qie's clothes until it creased, as if he was a drowning man clutching at straw while shudders rocked through him. Grow a little more meat on you, Xiao Qie said in a raspy voice. Lanju. Shen Zichuan's damp locks of hair stuck to his face. In the moments between kissing and panting, he could not find it in himself to answer. Sighs escaped through his lips as he reached out with his fingers as if to grab onto something. But Xiao Qie held his hands and did not wait for him to come to his senses as he entered with unhurried tenderness a slow, gentle ride after the gallop to his heart's content before. That is, if he had not gone in that deep. Shen Zichuan let Xiao Qie hold him in position as he took him all into the deepest depths. The never-ending onslaught of thrusts turned his mind into mush. His misty, lidded eyes became even more of an aphrodisiac, while the corner of his eyes glistened with pleasure as Xiao Qie permeated every pore of his being. Xian, Shen Zichuan followed his heart and called out his name, Yi. His calls caused Xiao Qie to break out into a sweat. Shen Zichuan lowered his head and edged along Xiao Qie's temple with the tip of his nose to disperse those beads of sweat. He called out wickedly, "Alang." Xiao Qie came to an abrupt stop. He grasped Shen Zichuan's jaw and corrected the position of his face, then kissed him hard in between gasps. These calls threw all those that once had order into disarray. It messed up the anxieties he had concealed away. Xiao Qie forgot them all. He did not need any of them, he only wanted Shen Zichuan. They could not indulge to their heart's content on the Shumi couch, and so the bedding on the bed was pulled down onto the rug. Even the pillow on the rug was drenched after some time. Shen Zichuan's eyes were half closed. He was wet to the bone, his energy fully expended. Xiao Qie propped himself up on his arms. He was still inside him. He lowered his head to press his forehead against Shen Zichuan's, all the while lightly gasping for breath. Lanju. Xiao Qie's sweat-drenched forehead inched down. He nuzzled against the crook of Shen Zichuan's neck and called out in a muted voice, Lanju. Shen Zichuan lifted his hand and placed it on Xiao Qie's hair. They clung this inseparably close together, in perfect harmony in every sense of the word. Shen Zichuan raised his legs, indicating for Xiao Qie to press down into him. Instead of doing so, Xiao Qie tightened his arms around him. His embrace was so tight that Shen Zichuan found it hard to breathe. He stroked the back of Xiao Qie's head with varying strength and tilted his head to breathe a light puff of air into Xiao Qie's ear. Very slowly, he called out, Langzai, for Xiao Qie bit him. Shen Zichuan let out a husky laugh. He sensed something trickling out of him, so he said, You came. Xiao Qie switched to kissing him. Both of them grind against each other intimately, squeezing out even more fluid as they moved. It still seemed as though Xiao Qie's sexual desire was about to rear its head again, causing Shen Zichuan to sigh repeatedly. Xiao Qie initially thought of putting the brake on as he had been going at it rather savagely, but when he looked at the expression in Shen Zichuan's eyes, he continued to penetrate deep into him. Xiao Qie stroked Shen Zichuan's cheeks and inserted 2 fingers into his mouth, leaving Shen Zichuan's tongue with nowhere to hide. Both of them clung close together, panting at the same pace as they took in each other's expressions all into their eyes. The last time was not intense, rather, it was more like a never-ending session of tender lovemaking. When Xiao Qie finally slid out of him, Shen Zichuan was no longer able to make a single sound. All of his vague grunts and moans had been devoured clean by Xiao Qie. As the waves of heat washed over him, he grasped Xiao Qie's jaw. Tears he could not stop soaked the hair on his temples wet. Xiao Qie finally lowered his body to snuggle with him, skin on skin. In the end, both of them were exhausted. Shen Zichuan could barely keep his eyes open. He was still grasping Xiao Qie's jaw. Xiao Qie seemingly let out a laugh and leaned over to kiss him. They kissed for a moment before falling asleep together like this, Xiao Qie on Shen Zichuan. Xiao Qie did not dream. It was already considered late when the day broke the next day. Xiao Qie had only just returned after leading his troops, so no one would have castigated him for it, but he woke up pretty early. Their lovemaking had dispelled emotions that might have been suppressed otherwise. When he got up, Shen Zichuan made to wake up too, so Xiao Qie covered the latter with a quilt and kissed him back onto the bed. Military affairs. Shen Zichuan struggled tiredly and sleepily in the darkness, and said with his eyes closed, I'll go later, in the afternoon. We'll discuss Xizhou's garrison troops later. Xiao Qie said. I want to settle the issue with Lei Jingzhe with Zhu Gui first. 2 hours. Shen Zichuan let out a long sigh. I'll be there 2 hours later. Xiao Qie stroked him and said, It's the same if you go tomorrow. There's no hurry to do it these few days. Go on, sleep. I'll be back for lunch at noon. Call Shifu along too. Shen Zichuan uttered an acknowledgement, although it was unknown if he had actually heard Xiao Qie clearly. Xiao Qie changed his robe after taking his bath. He did not get anyone to go in and clean up, but he had instructed Ding Dao and Jiyu Jin well in advance to stand guard in the courtyard. Then he left, taking Chen Yang and Xiao Tianya with him. Zhu Gui was already in the study, having a few rounds of discussion with his advisors. It was getting increasingly bright out there, but there was still no sign of Shen Zichuan. When he finally saw Xiao Qie, he hurried out to greet him. He dismissed the others, leaving only Kong Ling in the room to serve tea. Xiao Qie did not look to be in an amicable mood today, and all his so-called frivolity had been fully curbed. He cut such an intimidating presence that Zhu Gui and Kong Ling did not dare to take deep breaths. Xiao Qie had something on his mind, and so he did not beat around the bush after taking his seat. I let Lei Jingzhe go in the east. He should arrive in Dunju in 3 days. Kong Ling had done a head count of the bandits last night, and he had gotten suspicious when he did not see Lei Jingzhe. Hearing these words now, however, had dispelled his misgivings. They were already on familiar terms with Xiao Qie, so there was no need to be as punctilious as before. He gave a light cough and said, Your lordship presumably must have your own plans. Zhu Gui still had doubts, so he asked, Lei Jingzhe is a scheming man. Is your lordship planning to keep him for your own use by letting him go? This man is too shrewd to submit himself into compliance. There was no warmth in Xiao Qie's eyes as he said, although we've captured the majority of Lei Jingzhe's men this time, he still has men remaining in Mount Luo. And it's not just that. There are still plenty of Lei Jingzhe around even without this one Lei Jingzhe. Before Cizhou has its own garrison troops, it'll prove to be too difficult to get rid of them once and for all. Kong Ling thought of what Shen Zichuan had said a few days before. He nodded at Xiao Qie's words and said, that's right. Just as the vice commander said, as long as food is scarce in Zhongbua, there will still be decent commoners reduced to being bandits. There is no way to eradicate this issue just by force alone. Lei Jingzhe lost his right-hand men this time, yet he was still able to escape alone from my hands. Even if he has a glib tongue, he won't be able to clear himself of suspicions among the bandits. Xiao Qie said. I'm also going to give him a hand and make him the Imperial Army's spy that the bandits of the two prefectures of Dunju and Duanzhou will revolt against. This person is capable. He will certainly not sit still and wait for death. With that, the bandits will be thrown into internal turmoil and will be too preoccupied to set their eyes on Cizhou. It was only because he had intentionally released Lei Jingzhe that Lei Jingzhe would have to suffer. Cizhou was presently powerless, and this was already the best option out of the better strategies available to them. Kong Ling caught a hint of his intent when he heard this. He asked, Your lordship goes to such an extent to think for Cizhou. Is it because you are preparing to set off for Libei? Xiao Qie turned the teacup around and said, Time waits for no man, and Libei is currently often at war. It's inadvisable for me to remain in Cizhou for longer. Moreover, Chidong has already delayed for 2 months. Once Qi Zhuyin arrives, it'd be hard for me to leave even if I want to. After I leave Cizhou, Lanju will still continue to assist Cizhou. As I said before when I deployed the troops, I will not concern myself in all the matters concerning the garrison troops of Cizhou. But if both of you gentlemen still need the Imperial Army, just get Lanju to send me a notice, and I'll be sure to arrive within a day. The way he put it was worth pondering over. At least, in Kong Ling's ears, it sounded like both a favor and an intimidation. Xiao Qie said to let Lanju inform him. This indicated that he would not listen to the words of the whole lot of them from Cizhou. Lanju would have to be the one to decide whether or not to let him lead his troops back. However, Lanju was not someone who could be easily fooled, so they could not take advantage of the distance to deceive the Imperial Army into deploying their troops. In addition to the above, there was another layer of meaning. Kong Ling was a little on tenterhooks as he wiped his sweat. If Cizhou dared lay a hand on Shen Zichuan, Xiao Qie was sure to hasten there within a day. Chapter 118, Past Affairs. Chapter 118, Past Affairs. Kong Ling did not dare to grouse to himself for fear that Xiao Qie might sense something amiss. After wiping his sweat, he took a sip of his tea trying to cover it up, only to make it more conspicuous. He said as he nodded, Your lordship is returning to Libei to fight battles with the Bianxia tribes, so Cizhou can't possibly trouble the Imperial Army any further. Moreover, with the vice commander's presence here, Lei Jingzhe won't be able to get anything out of it even if he stages a comeback. Zhu Gui still had not gotten the hint at this point. He merely said, The march of an army over a long distance is beset with difficulties. Cizhou is to the south of Libei, so Libei has nothing to worry about back here. If we can be of any use to your lordship in the future, Cizhou will surely do its best to help. As for those bandits who have been taken into custody at the prison, how does your lordship wish to deal with them? Several of those bandits were once one of the few bandit chiefs from Mount Luo. There's not much use in killing them, so why not release them together with Lei Jingzhe? Xiao Qie already had a plan in mind. He said, I've already bribed a few of the bandits to spread around the news that Lei Jingzhe has been released by the Imperial Army. Half a month later, they will break out of the prison and flee with Ding Niu and Liuer. When the time comes, Cizhou can just send men to pursue them and drive them back to Duanzhou's territory. They have men who died at the hands of the Imperial Army. Once they conclude that the siege in the east was a leak from Lei Jingzhe, they will never let him off. Zhu Gui and Kong Ling nodded in unison. Thinking as Xiao Qiye was about to return to Libei soon, Zhu Gui decided that he had to discuss the military provisions with him. They had conferred with Sun Zichuan a few days ago regarding the military provisions allowance for the Imperial Army next year, but Sun Zichuan had promptly turned it down. Cizhou had originally planned to give the Imperial Army an allowance of 16,000 dan of grains after spring next year. Zhu Gui faced Xiao Qiye and deliberated over his words. We know it is a small amount, but it's a little token of appreciation from Cizhou to your lordship. I have already told the vice commander of this. The vice commander understands Cizhou's difficulties. He wants us to sell these grains at a suitable price to Chazhou and use the money as funds for the reconstruction. We have been thinking about it for these few days, and we still feel bad about it. Your lordship, there is a piece of vacant land to the northwest of Cizhou. It's the former site of the Beiyuan hunting grounds. At the very beginning, we wanted to till the land and cultivate fields there, but the soil isn't suitable, and we couldn't grow any grains except sow some rapeseeds. Rather than leaving it idle, we might as well gift it to your lordship to create a track for horse riding or to build a new camp as you wish. The emergence of the Beiyuan hunting grounds preceded the Nanlin hunting grounds. Owing to the rise of Xiao Fengshu in the north later, the Li clan cancelled the annual ceremony at the Beiyuan hunting grounds and had the venue changed to Nanlin hunting grounds, where they could feel more at ease. This piece of land was not small. It was even bigger than Xiao Qiye's military drill grounds at Mount Feng in Kudu. It was far enough to pose a threat to Dan Cheng and close enough to provide support to Cizhou. And it also stood on Libei's boundary line. It was an excellent position from which to advance and retreat, launch an assault and defend. Xiao Qiye's interest was piqued. He dreaded the Chidong garrison troops in the south. Sun Zichuan was remaining behind in Zhongbua. If he did not have a place to station his troops, he would have to rush to and forth between both ends. Never mind if it was just him alone. But if he ran around like this with tens of thousands of men in tow, then he would not only expose their tracks but also draw unnecessary troubles to themselves. But Xiao Qiye had no money. He had scrimped and saved to build up the military drill grounds at Mount Feng. It was not as imposing as the 8 Great Training Division's military grounds, but it consumed real silvers. His noble title was useless now, and there was no one to pay him a salary. His residences in Kudu had turned into lifeless objects he could see but not eat. Even taking out a handful of copper coins would prove to be a problem for him. The little jade bead earring Sun Zichuan was presently wearing on his right ear was polished by Xiao Qiye himself. In the past, Xiao Qiye would not even blink an eye at losing a few ivory fans. Now that Lanzu's little bamboo fan had gotten stained on one side and he had promised to have it replaced, he was thinking of making one himself later. Seeing as Xiao Qiye had still yet to say a word, Zhu Gui thought that the piece of land was not to his liking, so he said, "The place is big. Although it is a venue for hunting, it has fallen into years of disrepair, and the errand runners have all left. The perimeter wall seems to me to be still solid. After your lordship takes over, you'll just need to fortify its defenses a little, and you'll be able to use it." Kong Ling also added, "Your lordship helped Cizhou out of its predicament. Naturally, we will not try to fool your lordship on this matter. We had also mentioned this place to the vice commander yesterday, and the vice commander said he would personally make a trip down to take a look when he finds the time these 2 days. Seems like he likes it too. It had been a passionate night last night, and Sun Zichuan did not get the time or chance to bring this matter up. What's more, Xiao Qiye had left in a hurry in the morning, and Sun Zichuan was still not wide awake then. The place is good. It's suitable as a resting place and temporary lodging for the Imperial Army. Lanju and I both like it." Without a change in expression, Xiao Qiye said, "There's no need for both of you to stand on such ceremony, but thank you." Sun Zichuan got out of bed and put on a plain, white set of regular clothes. He originally wanted to go out, but the traces from their lovemaking were too obvious. The marks on his chest, waist, side of the legs, crook of the neck could be covered up with clothes. But he was too thin-skinned. As long as they had gone at it vigorously at night, the lingering redness at the sides of his eyes would not fully recede the next day. Ding Dao was standing on the veranda feeding the red carps. He was also rattling on and on, telling Jiyu Jin a story. The fish bait in his hands kept leaking into the vat, where the two red carps gobbled it down. By the time Jiyu Jin realized what was happening, one of them had already gotten so bloated that it flipped belly up. Jiyu Jin made to beat up Ding Dao. Sensing trouble, Ding Dao hurriedly stuffed the remaining fish bait into his pocket and fled to the principal room. He yelled, "Young master, bad news." Jinji fed the fish to death. Shun Zichuan picked up the sweet soup from the tray. He gave a bowl to Ding Dao and told him to sit under the eaves to drink it. He then asked Jiyu Jin, "How are your injuries today?" Jiyu Jin saw Shun Zichuan wearing wooden clogs and knew that the latter would not be heading out today. He bowed in greeting and said, "Much better." The physician came as scheduled to change the bandages. "Since young master is not going out today, shall we get the kitchen to prepare the meals now?" Clusters of tree shades decorated the grounds in the courtyard, while shadows of flowers adorned the panels of the two wide-opened doors. The weather was fine today. It was not yet noon, but it was already starting to get hot. Shun Zichuan's fingers that were basking in the sunlight looked as though they were clutching a handful of crystal-clear amber. He could not stand the cold, and he also disliked the heat. He looked to be exhausted today, and his entire person exuded laziness. The weather is hot. Shifu dreads greasy food, and Xian gets cranky easily. Get the chef to choose and make some light dishes. You're currently nursing an injury, so do as the physician and Shifu say and get the kitchen to make an individual portion for you. Shun Zichuan retreated half a step and returned to the coolness of the shade under the eaves. Ding Dao, go to the courtyard and call Shifu over. Ji Gang did not stay in the separate courtyard Shun Zichuan had initially given him. Instead, he lived in a courtyard together with Qiao Tianya and the rest. People tend to fear loneliness when they grow old, and it was inevitable for him to get all sentimental now that Qi Hualian was no longer around to squabble with him. The good thing was that there were those from Libei and those who originally came from the imperial bodyguards among this batch of guards. All of them held the Ji clan's boxing style in esteem, and they hoped to gain pointers and guidance from Ji Gang. That was why they liked to hang around Ji Gang when they were not on duty. What's more, they were all lads who had yet to get married. Ji Gang found them boisterous and lively, and it made him happy to be around them too. Ji Gang went to bed early and woke up early nowadays. He got up at the first quarter of the hour of Maro 3 today and watched Qiao Tianya and the others practice shadowboxing in the courtyard. After drinking his tea, he came out for a stroll and found that Shun Zichuan was still asleep. So he took another stroll with his hands at his back and returned to find that Shun Zichuan was still not up. So on seeing him now, he could not refrain from asking, "Why did you get up so late today? Have you fallen ill?" Taken aback, Shun Zichuan paused for a moment before he said, "I overslept." Ji Gang noted that he seemed to be under the weather today, so he said, "Although there are plenty of issues at present, you also have to take care of your health. I'll cook a couple of fish dishes for you tonight." As they chatted, Xiao Qie returned. He saw Ding Dao at the entrance of the courtyard and knew that Ji Gang had come. He took off his outer garment and asked Chen Yang as he washed his hands, "Did Shifu come in the morning too?" Chen Yang answered truthfully, "Young master bought Shifu a skylark a few days earlier, and Shifu would always take a stroll with the bird every morning when he gets up. Young master was still sleeping when he came to the entrance of our courtyard this morning, so he asked about it several times." Xiao Qie wiped his hands and walked along the walkway to the front. When he entered, he carried out a disciple bow to Ji Gang. He had been very respectful to Ji Gang and Zhuo Qianqiu back then at the Plum Blossom residence, but Ji Gang could not forget that kick he gave Shun Zichuan 6 years ago. Now that Shun Zichuan and Xiao Qie were in the same boat rowing towards a common goal, Ji Gang thought that they had buried the hatchet in private and were merely friends on good terms with one another. So, for Shun Zichuan's sake, he would not give Xiao Qie the stink eye. Ji Gang and Zhuo Qianqiu were brothers. According to seniority, Xiao Qie's paying of obeisance to him was etiquette. Ji Gang nodded and said concisely, "Your lordship may dispense with such formalities." Xiao Qie took his seat. Ji Gang was at the head, so Xiao Qie and Shun Zichuan were sitting face to face with one another. During the meal, Ji Gang asked questions relating to the suppression of the bandits as well as stuff about Zhuo Qianqiu. Xiao Qie answered him all in full detail. He did not hope to give a perfect answer. All he strove for was to be genuine in his responses. Ji Gang was a person who greatly valued relationships and ties. In his younger years, he screwed up his assignment because of drinking and caused his adoptive father, Ji Wufan, to lose the favor of Emperor Guangcheng. This had been weighing heavily on his heart. Later on, Duanzhou fell into the enemy's hands, and he never touched wine again. He did not have Qi Hualian's illustrious reputation for his talents, but he had great prestige among the imperial bodyguards. He was the main reason why the group with Ji Qingqing at the head was willing to go all out to help Shen Zichuan when Shen Zichuan was flogged and thrown into the imperial prison, even extending their assistance to him in the period after. When Ji Gang was still serving as the vice commander in the imperial bodyguards, he rarely abused his authority to oppress the others. He also abhorred Pan Rugi and the likes. Again and again, he had helped the innocents to redress the injustices they had suffered, and because of this, he had offended quite a number of powerful officials. When it came to elders like this, Xiao Qie would not resort to dubious tricks for his own personal advantage. He had to take out all of his sincerity. Only then would he be able to make Ji Gang see him in a new, more favorable light. Their meal lasted an hour. Ji Gang thought that they still had important matters to discuss, and so he did not stay for long and left early. Xiao Qie was changing his clothes. When his upper body was bare, he pulled over Shen Zichuan's hand and placed it on his back to touch it. Shen Zichuan was still sitting on the mat with a brush in one hand as he calculated the expenses for this period of time. As he touched Xiao Qie's sweat, he lifted his eyes and said, "Just how nervous were you?" "That was scary." Xiao Qie swiftly put on his clothes. "I was worried my answers were not sincere enough, and it would alienate Shifu from me even more. I've been really busy this period of time. I will have to find a day later to talk it over with Shifu." A father loves his child without asking for anything in return, for Shen Zichuan set the brush down. There is no transactional exchange of benefits and profits when it comes to Shifu, only genuine affection and sincere concern. Second young master has a long way ahead. That kick of yours really set you back a long way. Xiao Qie slumped into the rattan chair. He thought for a moment and said, "If it had been my old man sitting there today, we might not even get to finish the meal." Still feeling the trepidation, Xiao Qie touched his own chest and looked at Shen Zichuan, who was deep in thought over the accounts. He held the brush, then set it down, and his sleeve slid down to reveal a portion of fair skin. The expression on his side profile was calm. There was no one else in the room, and his collar that had been slightly loosened because of the heat exposed a snow-white expanse with traces of love bites on it. How flimsy. For a moment, Xiao Qie was in a daze as he gazed blankly at Shen Zichuan. He thought of many things, and yet it also seemed as if he had figured out nothing. "Lanju." Xiao Qie inexplicably called out to him. Shen Zichuan's mind was not here. He just happened to be thinking that he should get Ji Qingqing to find a few stewards from Jueshi who could do the accounts and have them sent over when he suddenly heard Xiao Qie's voice. Although his eyes never left the accounts book, he turned his face slightly and answered, "Spit it out if you have something to say." Xiao Qie abruptly stood up, turned around a few times, and suddenly squatted behind Shen Zichuan to embrace him. Shen Zichuan was still writing. It was all thanks to the power of his extraordinary focus that he did not mess up his strokes. Xiao Qie nuzzled against Shen Zichuan's cheek from behind until Shen Zichuan's face felt hot. Shen Zichuan had no idea what was up with Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie never said a word as he touched Shen Zichuan all over and scooped Shen Zichuan into his arms, clinging onto him like glue. And just like this, Shen Zichuan sat in Xiao Qie's embrace and continued to do his accounts. When he ran into difficulty, he got Xiao Qie to stretch his fingers out, but Xiao Qie was unwilling to and did the sums orally as he continued to hug him. Surprisingly enough, he was pretty swift in his calculation. "Second young master." Shen Zichuan pushed the abacus aside. "You have a bit of a knack for this. Calculate these all for me, will you?" Xiao Qie pulled the abacus back and said, "Count long enough, and I'll fumble. It's so complicated that it's better to hand it over to the professionals. Do you know who in Kudu is the best in arithmetic?" Shen Zichuan replied, "That, I really don't know. Third Missy Hua Xiangyi." So Shen Zichuan asked, Then do you know who in Zhongbua is the most skilled in employing diversionary tactics to lure the enemies? Xiao Qie ventured a guess. Tan Tai Long. It's Xiao Ziyan. Shun Zichuan finally looked at him and said in all seriousness. Look at him nuzzling away at me until my heart goes all pitter-patter and I'm too preoccupied to get down to serious business. I'm unworthy of the reputation. Xiao Qie moved in closer. It's only because I saw how sweaty the little young master is and with clothes in such a state of disarray that I've specifically come over to drop you a reminder or two. Then you are a real gentleman. Shun Zichuan brushed the tip of this finger that was moistened with tea water across the back of Xiao Qie's hand and said, unlike me and my mind working in overdrive. Chapter 119, Past Acquaintance. Chapter 119, Past Acquaintance. Xiao Qie said, let's hear more about it. Shun Zichuan was feeling so warm from Xiao Qie's embrace that he began to sweat. He said, you'll lose the fun if you voice it out when it comes to matters like undressing and what happens after. Xiao Qie grabbed hold of Shun Zichuan's fleeing finger. He laughed for a moment before saying, you'll lose the fun if you voice it out. Then, take a moment to hear me out. I'll say it for you. Shun Zichuan looked toward the account books. Xiao Qie squeezed Shun Zichuan the pulp of Shun Zichuan's finger and looked at the account book together with him. He said, I haven't even started, so why are you getting all hot? Shun Zichuan looked askance at Xiao Qie and mouthed soundlessly, because of you. Xiao Qie looked at Shun Zichuan for a moment, then suddenly lowered his head and buried it into the pit of Shun Zichuan's neck. All his earlier emotions had melted away at this look of Shun Zichuan. They became another kind of raging torrents that surged along Xiao Qie's chest to his entire body. But no matter how tempestuous the waves were inside of him, he did not dare to use even more strength in his embrace of Shun Zichuan. That kick that had never once turned a hair during all the years in Kudu had, along with the passage of time, cunningly turned into pangs of pain after Xiao Qie fell into the clutches of love. The turbidness that was love and hatred went through a cleansing by the heavy downpour to become a crystal-clear lake. Xiao Qie drew in his claws, bowing his head in submission to the word love. Shun Zichuan released his hand and held hands again with Xiao Qie with interlocking fingers. He tilted his head to bump gently against Xiao Qie's unmoving head and said, have you fallen asleep? Xiao Qie raised his head and said in a hoarse voice, oh, how I love you so. Shun Zichuan was slightly stunned. Xiao Qie looked at him and enunciated each word as he repeated, I love you so much. Shun Zichuan remained stunned for a moment before he said, Xiao Qie could not wait any longer. He turned his head and kissed Shun Zichuan hard, as if he wanted to give all the love in his heart that could not be expressed with words alone to Shun Zichuan. The cool breeze in the courtyard stirred the bamboo blinds, while shadows of flowers shifted under the eaves along with the slanting trajectory of the sun. At the same time golden light, having penetrated through the obstacles to make it way deeper in, cascaded over the ground. Beiyuan hunting grounds was not that far away from Cizhou, and there was also a bridle path connecting both places. Lang Dao Shuejin could reach it in half a day, so Xiao Qie took Chen Yang and Ding Dao to take a look at the site the next day. Shun Zichuan finished sorting out the accounts for this period of time in Cizhou and, together with Zhu Gui and Kong Ling, made some changes to matters relating to the Cizhou garrison troops. Although I had the thought that quite a number of people would come forward to answer our recruitment call, I never expected it to be this many. Zhu Gui was overjoyed. With this, we can further expand the plowing range next year. There's a shortage of grains on the outside which Cizhou can supply. To many of those in desperate situations, this is timely help that's equivalent to sending charcoals in snowy weather. It not only solves their urgent needs but also prevents them from turning to banditry. Kong Ling looked delighted as he said to Shun Zichuan, we shall have to trouble the vice commander regarding the military arms. With the way things are going, there will be no more bandits in Cizhou's territory when next year comes around. Zhu Gui did not sleep the entire night. He had been making a lot of plans. He said, if we can also help Dunju and Duanzhou out of their predicaments, then the bandits from Mount Luo will fall apart without the need for us to attack them. While the recruitment is showing initial success, Your Excellency cannot simply rely on this alone. Xizhou has been able to sustain such a large amount of food consumption because everyone from top to bottom in Xizhou was able to work as one in the past 5 years. Duanzhou lies close to Bianxia. Even if they have a change of heart and wish to reclaim the wastelands for farming, they won't be able to do it. Sun Zichuan still has other considerations. He said, "What's more, we currently do not have an emperor on the throne, and ambitious men are easily born out of troubled times. There's a Lei Jingzhe in Mount Luo, so Chazhou might just have their own Lei Jingzhe too. Xizhou has only just begun to toddle, there's no rush." What he said. Kongling nodded and said, "The most pressing task at present is to resolve the issue of household registration. Many of them fled here from other places, and they don't have any documentary proof on them. If they want to reside in Xizhou permanently, they will need an identity." Sun Zichuan paused for a moment and said, "During the reign of Yongyi, the Eastern Palace pushed forth a census registry to register common folks as citizens. It was to be checked and verified by the layers of prefectural prefects, district magistrates, and townships of the various lands. Xizhou is less populated at present. Since Xizhou is no longer under Dazhou's command, you can abolish the original 3 registers and let Xizhou develop its own new registers, with vagrants still prohibited in the city. Once the registry is finalized, Xizhou will be able to collect taxes based on the registry, and subsequently, the accounts will become clearer too. Then we can get to work and have it straightened out these few days." Zhu Gui paused for a moment, then continued, "I'm only worried about the Chidong garrison troops now. It has been so long." Kongling piped up too. "Why haven't we heard any news from Chidong at all?" Sun Zichuan had also gotten an inkling of sorts from this wait. If Kudu wanted to stop Xiao Qie from returning to Libei, they only had to mobilize Qi Zhuyin right away, and she would have been able to stop Xiao Qie at the border of Zhongbo a month ago. But Kudu did not do so. They sent Han Jin, an armchair strategist who was all talk and no action. This legitimate son born of the Han clan was taken captive by the imperial army outside Dancheng and was still being held in prison. Going by the division and distribution of Chidong's 5 commanderies, Qi Zhuyin could assemble 100,000 men within half a month. Yet, there was still no sign of her to date. It was already late when Sun Zichuan came out of the Jew's residence. He estimated the time. Xiao Qie should still be on the way back to the city, so he was not in a hurry to return home. As he descended the stairs, the path ahead brightened up. Fei Sheng carried a lantern, illuminating the road ahead for Sun Zichuan. Sun Zichuan had been busy with other matters these few days, and so he had yet to have a talk with Fei Sheng. Fei Sheng tried his best to get close to Chen Yang every day, and he was the most diligent in serving tea and water to Ji Gang. This man, a veteran who had tumbled his way out of Kudu, was presently holding up the lantern for Sun Zichuan, and he did not speak up to interrupt Sun Zichuan's thoughts along the way either. From all appearances, he looked as if he was already content enough to hold the lantern for Sun Zichuan. There were some people on the streets. Fei Sheng was carefully guiding the way when he suddenly heard Sun Zichuan said, "I heard you recommended yourself for the job when his lordship went out this morning." Fei Sheng answered with a neutral expression, "I saw that Jiyu Jin had yet to recover from his injuries, and so I thought of going along with his lordship on his behalf." Sun Zichuan looked at the road and said nothing more. Once back at the residence, Qiao Tianya took over the lantern. There was still Jiyu Jin in the courtyard, and it was not Fei Sheng's turn to be on shift duty. So he went back on his own initiative. If master gives him the cold shoulder, Qiao Tianya said, he might come to harbor resentment. As Sun Zichuan entered the long walkway, he looked back to see that Fei Sheng had already made a turn and passed through the moon gate too on the other side. He said, "I have the mind to use him, but he might not necessarily think highly of me. His rank in the imperial bodyguard is higher than yours." Han Cheng could be said to be one of the bigwigs he counted on for backing. He was also Han Cheng's right-hand man before the former emperor met with sudden death. There has to be a reason why Han Cheng wants to kill him. It has been several days since he came to Xizhou, and yet he has never shown any intent to speak of this reason to me. Sun Zichuan stood still and smiled at Qiao Tianya. It wasn't me but Xian he was originally gunning for when he willingly staked and gambled everything on that one move of his in Kudu. Xian is the second legitimate son of the Prince of Libei. The hereditary prince was severely injured at that time, and the others all thought the Xian was going back to replace Xiao Fengshu. Fei Sheng was already starting to harbor ill feelings towards Han Cheng. Rather than compromise and make concessions to achieve his aim, he might as well leave Kudu for Li Bei to carve out another path for himself. The identity of a life-saving benefactor is enough for him to secure a stable life in Li Bei. Qiao Tianya had some understanding of Fei Sheng. He said, "It's inconvenient for Ji Yujin now that he's wounded." Fei Sheng recommended himself for the job today because he wants to take Ji Yujin's place. A pity his lordship is a hard-hearted man and would not give him this opportunity. But Fei Sheng was prepared. He had been so attentive towards Ji Gang just so he could leave himself a way out. The self-recommendation today was a kind of test to sound Xiao Qie out. He had already understood Xiao Qie's intent, and so he shifted his gaze back to Shen Zichuan. "This person has real capabilities," Shen Zichuan said. "He's on par with Ji Yujin. It'd be truly a pity to cast him aside and not use him." They had already arrived at the courtyard while they were speaking. Ji Yujin was about to arrange for the people to serve the food, but Shen Zichuan told him to wait. He should almost be back now. Shen Zichuan turned back. "Go wait at the entrance and receive him." But this wait lasted for half a night, and Xiao Qie still had not returned. Shen Zichuan stayed up until the burning candles were gone by half before he heard movements at the front. Xiao Qie strode into the courtyard but did not enter the room immediately. He was covered in dust all over. He took off his outer robe in the courtyard and turned back to look at the person behind him, although the words that came out of his mouth were, "Lanju." Shen Zichuan looked past Xiao Qie's shoulder and saw Chen Yang and Ji Yujin supporting someone in. The courtyard was not bright enough for Shen Zichuan to make out who this person was. This person's robe had been ripped to pieces, and the legs of his trousers were torn. He was wearing a pair of straw shoes that had split apart, and his legs were all caked in dirt and mud. He could not stand firm on his feet and had to rely on Chen Yang and Ji Yujin to hold him up as he spouted nonsense. Disheveled and unkempt, he was truly a sorry sight to behold. Shen Zichuan suddenly thought of something under the faint light. He probed, "Your Excellency, you?" That man shivered and struggled for a bit as he peered forward through the dimness in disbelief. His messy hair exposed a pair of eyes among them. He froze for a moment when he saw Shen Zichuan. Then he swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva. His mouth opened and closed. All of a sudden, he burst out bawling. "This is draining the life out of me." Yu Xiaozai cried himself hoarse. He kept wiping his face as he shouted, "Vice Commander, the Grand Secretary is no more. I'm going to die too. I've been fleeing and hiding the entire journey here. Life is hard." Startled, Shen Zichuan strode a step out and asked in a heavy voice, "What do you mean, Secretariat Elder Hai is no more?" Chokes of sobs clogged up Yu Xiaozai's throat. He wanted to answer, but all that came out was the sound of his crying. He cried so hard that he was virtually on the verge of sliding to the ground. He kept shaking his head. At last, overwhelmed with grief and with his voice hoarse from exhaustion, he answered in bureaucratic speak, "The Grand Secretary." The Grand Secretary risked his life in futile remonstration. "Take him away to calm down for a moment and have a change of clothes." Xiao Qie said with a cool head. "Ji Yujin, go inform the kitchen to make some soup and have it sent over." Those wretched cries lingered in the air. Shen Zichuan was still standing in the same spot. For all his hundreds and thousands of guesses, he had never foreseen that Hai Liangyi would die. Hai Liangyi was the stabilizing force of Kudu. He could even hold on tight to his position in the Grand Secretariat back then, when the Hua and Pan factions were at the height of their power and influence. Even if Han Cheng wanted to assist a male offspring from his own clan to the throne after Li Jianheng's death, Hai Liangyi should still be the first and best choice of a minister inside and outside the imperial court to entrust the child to. Xiao Qie held on to Shen Zichuan's arm to bring him out of his stupefaction. Xiao Qie said, "I found him among the groups of bandits a few li west of the hunting grounds. It hadn't been easy for him to get out of Kudu, and he was robbed by the bandits after leaving Dancheng, so he could only walk barefoot towards Cizhou. He has a letter on him, which center you wrote to you. He has news of Kudu and Chidong as well." Yu Xiaozai still needed someone to help support him when he entered the room again. He was so famished that he had no strength and had to carry the bowl in his arms to wolf down the food before they had their conversation. Tears were still streaming down his cheeks as he ate. He seemed to be in a rush as he choked on his food and coughed. It was only when his hunger abated some that he covered up his face with a clean handkerchief and wiped away at it for a while. It's truly a stroke of luck that I could live long enough to see the Vice Commander. His Excellency Center's letter is in my bosom. I kept it close to me throughout for fear that the bandits would search me and find it. Yu Xiaozai sat on his heels and said with difficulty, "Before I begin, I have to inform both of you gentlemen that the new emperor who is about to ascend to the throne is a woman." Chapter 120, Affairs in the Capital. Chapter 120, Affairs in the Capital. There was no place for women in the imperial court. Feudal ethics drove them into the ladies' chambers, becoming fragile objects in the small courtyard of their living quarters, cared for in every way by their husbands and servants, parents and children. They were porcelain vases to be appraised for their value as they waited to be married off. They did not need lofty aspirations. The Empress Dowager, Hua Hawei, was from an illustrated clan. She was a legitimate daughter of direct descent born to the principal's wife of the Hua clan. Before she came of age, she had never seen the world beyond the walls of her quarters, and after she came of age too she was still bound within the confines of her courtyard. She wrested away the most supreme power and authority of this world from her husband's hands, yet she never strode a step beyond that line. Instead, she let down the beaded curtain and sat cautiously with her back straight behind it. 3 Commander-in-Chief, Qi Zhuyin, similarly came from a distinguished background. She was the legitimate daughter of direct descent born to the principal's wife of the Qi clan, a military family of generals. Before she went to war, she was betrothed to another, but after she went to war, no one dared to marry her. She never got the conferment she deserved, only the concession before Yulong Terrace. For the Ministry of Rites said that she was not worthy of enjoying the posthumous privilege of being enshrined and worshipped by the imperial ancestral temple after death. The name, Qi Zhuyin, had been, to date, branded as the little girl of Chidong. If only Qi Shiyu's sons had lived up to expectations, the position of commander-in-chief of the military forces would never have come to fall upon her shoulders. Xue Xiuzhua initially did not have the thought to support and assist Ling Ting to the throne. That acute disappointment when he found out that the imperial heir was a girl made him change his strategy right at once, but then, he changed his mind when he saw Ling Ting. Because Ling Ting resembled Emperor Guangxing way too much. Any longtime minister who was old enough to have seen Emperor Guangxing before could tell Ling Ting's origins at a glance. This was an aberration, the result of incest within the Li clan. When the Eastern Palace fell from power during the reign of Yongyi, the only reason for Emperor Guangxing to leave the palace was to pay a visit to Prince Qin, who had taken ill, and his beautiful, defenseless wife. Emperor Guangxing did not have any imperial concubine who was in his favor during the later years of the reign of Yongyi. After he fell ill, the Empress, Hua Hawei, took control of the former imperial court and harem to prevent him from begetting another imperial heir. It was under these layers of walls around him that Emperor Guangxing set his eyes on his daughter-in-law. A petty princess consort Qin gave birth to a girl. Like an old lion who had exhausted every bit of his energy, Emperor Guangxing did not even lift an eyelid when he learned of this news and subsequently lost all the lofty aspirations he once harbored. No one knew if Prince Qin had caught some wind of it, but it was not long before he passed away from his illness. Before his death, he threw Ling Ting out of Kudu. However, it seemed to be fated that Shang Yun would come across her and bring her back. When Xue Xiuzhua had just found Ling Ting, she was uncouth in behavior and was already in her teens. Pulling her back onto the seat of the imperial heir would be an impossible task without the determination to transform her from inside out. At first, it was tough. She had wasted too much time in Shangyun Villa. If she herself were not resolute enough to erase all those superfluous traces on her completely, then it would have been undoable even if Xue Xiuzhua had superhuman powers. But Ling Ting actually corrected herself, one step at a time. Little by little, she scraped all those vulgar and frivolous things off herself. At first, there were plenty of words she could not read, so she studied hard through the nights. Strokes she could not write well, she would practice them day and night. She seemed to be the last remaining bit of strength heaven left for the Li clan's empire. She allowed Shuexiuzhua to see a faint glimmer of light in that deteriorating situation. A few months ago, when the misty rain enveloped the silk tree blossoms, when Qi Hualien rejected Shuexiuzhua in the loft, Ling Ting was sitting upright at the table practicing her writing. She used so much strength in her writing that she almost broke the paper. After she was done writing, she turned her head aside to look at the drizzling rain. She watched it for a long time without expression. Shuexiuzhua later came over to have a meal with her. She sat in the seat of lower priority and ate her meal with precise table manners. Shuexiuzhua was particular about not speaking when eating, so they never talked when they had their meals. After the meal, he would test Ling Ting on her homework. This was the most important event of the day. Ling Ting had to be precise and clear in her answers. Shuexiuzhua never scolded her, but he was more exacting on her than anyone else. Teacher. Ling Ting paused for a moment as she lowered her head. Am I going to have a change of teacher? Shuexiuzhua put the books in order and said with indifference, this isn't a matter for you to think about. Ling Ting was silent as she propped herself up. She listened as Shuexiuzhua rose to his feet and walked towards the door. She suddenly turned her head aside to look at Shuexiuzhua and asked, because I'm a woman? Shuexiuzhua stood still and turned back to look at Ling Ting too. Ling Ting never averted her eyes. She was just as calm as Shuexiuzhua. I'm a woman. Ling Ting said. If the new teacher isn't willing to teach me for this reason, then I'd like to ask to see him. Shuexiuzhua turned around again and changed his shoes. The sound of rain outside intensified. He said, no. You just don't have the affinity to be teacher and pupil with him. I'll still continue to teach you. Affinity is the most difficult thing to make do with. Wise teachers are hard to seek. I'm not willing to let a teacher slip by because of this. Ling Ting had already stood up. Teacher. But Shuexiuzhua paid her no heed, nor did she answer her. He lifted the curtain, and the young servant boy waiting on the outside hurriedly held up the umbrella. Without letting the servant touch the books, he went down the stairs and left. Ling Ting stood where she was and watched through the gap in the same curtain as Shuexiuzhua walked a few steps before he disappeared in the rain. She knew this was a soundless rejection from Shuexiuzhua. No matter what other people thought of Shuexiuzhua, he was, in Ling Ting's eyes, exceedingly calm under that gentle and refined mask of his. He was even a little conceited, he would never open himself up to manipulation by others, and it was rare for him to heed the words of others. Ling Ting could only let the matter drop. She sat back down, flipped open the essay on contemporary politics that Shuexiuzhua had left behind, and copied Shuexiuzhua's characters. But she could never write like him. Because she did not know how to rein herself in diplomatically. Her strokes were just like steel blades that would never go around in circles. Several months later, the scorching sun blazed down upon Yulong Terrace where a densely packed mass of court officials was kneeling. These were officials from humble backgrounds headed by Hai Liangyi. After the 6th month, Han Cheng brought back a boy from his own clan and claimed this child to be a descendant of the Li clan. Under Yarrow Wenyu's meticulous care, Hai Liangyi's condition took a turn for the better. The first thing he did when he attended court was to reject Han Cheng's memorial in his capacity as the Grand Secretary of the Grand Secretariat. He also demanded an official verification of his child's identity. But the emperors of the Li clan were all dead, and it was impossible to determine if this child was a descendant of the Li clan based on the Empress Dowager alone. Both parties reached a deadlock, with no one willing to make any more concessions. I was the 8th Great Training Division's vice commander during the reign of Yongyi, and I was also the top military officer under Emperor Guangqing's command. I have a private letter from Emperor Guangqing entrusting the care of the child to me. Grand Secretary, is this not enough either? Han Cheng had gained power recently and so dared to refute Hai Liangyi on the imperial court. Hai Liangyi did not have the same vigor as before after his illness. His heart would palpitate and his hands would tremble just by standing for a few moments. He stepped out and said, mere words without a factual basis. If the commander is willing to make the private letter public and hand it over to the Grand Secretariat for examination, then you and I would have no further need to engage in such a war of words on the imperial court. Han Cheng sneered inwardly to himself. There was no imperial heir at present, and it was the throne being left vacant that Hai Liangyi should be getting anxious about. For him to be so unwilling to make a concession, he must already have found a candidate. So he said, "The throne has been left empty for more than a month. What is the Grand Secretary still waiting for? The Grand Secretariat has been deliberating over it. Has it still not come up with a solution?" Hai Liangyi was sweating all over. He felt a stifling oppression in his chest, so he took a short breather before continuing. "We sorted out the clan register and found out that the second son of the former Prince Yang's grandson born of a concubine is still in Huaizhou. He is a descendant of the Li clan with a traceable lineage. According to the rules, no one else but him is fit to be the current crown prince candidate. Prince Yang was the Prince of Huaizhou during the reign of Wanshuan. His descendants of direct lineage died in battle at Luoxia Pass, and those born of concubines further down are all from the collateral branch of the clan. How can they be called the bloodline of the Li clan if we were really to go into it? The second son of Prince Yang's grandson born of a concubine is already approaching 70 years of age, so how can he still head the government?" Han Cheng smiled. "Furthermore, it's a long and bumpy journey. How is he going to stand this kind of physical and mental torment? Grand Secretary, there is simply no way we can discuss this further in detail." Both parties stood their ground, with no one backing down. There were still students from the Imperial College kneeling outside. The Empress Dowager listened behind the bead curtains for a moment before saying, "Although this matter is urgent, there is still room for discussion. Secretariat Elder, the Grand Secretariat assists in governmental affairs, and there has never been a time when I do a perfunctory job of matters. If you have objections, you can come over to Mingli Hall to discuss it face-to-face with me. Please get the students to disperse." She spoke in a soft voice, but Hai Liangyi could hear the displeasure. Although Han Cheng went all out to push forth this child, he had always been submitting his memorials in the capacity as the former vice-commander of the 8 great training divisions. He never got the officials from the noble clans to second his proposal. This was to, firstly, allow the Han clan to become the only support the new emperor could rely on, and secondly, avoid suspicion. Avoiding suspicion was exceptionally important. Hua Xiqian and Pan Rugi both failed because they did not know how to avoid suspicion. Forming cliques for one's selfish ends was a great taboo in the imperial court. It had not been long since the Empress Dowager took control over the imperial court again. At present, she was just like the emperor. What she could not stand to see was her ministers flocking together to become a force powerful enough to coerce her into making policy decisions. As such, she did not promote officials from humble backgrounds as a gesture of goodwill, nor did she promote officials from the noble clans in order to secure her power. She seemed to understand that Dazhou had already come to a certain point. Instead of pinning her hopes on a puppet like she had done a few years before, she might as well count on herself. Hai Liangyi was sick for 2 months, during which officials from humble backgrounds were extremely jittery and on edge. With Kong Qiu and Center Yu taking the lead, they carried out plenty of discussions in private, and they also repeatedly submitted memorials to ask the Empress Dowager to let Hai Liangyi return to the imperial court to administer state affairs. Not only that, the students from the Imperial College still had the nerve to engage in idle talks of state affairs. The 6th month had only just arrived, and there were already rumors that the Empress Dowager had seized power and established herself as the ruler. The Empress Dowager did not have any overt discussions with Hai Liangyi, but she increased the frequency of visits paid by the eunuchs. This was a kind of covert prompt. So Hai Liangyi attended court as soon as the 6th month came around, when his illness had just taken a turn for the better. Although he had, in the past decades, asserted that he never was a part of a faction or clique, he had already become the direction in which all the scholars of humble origins in the world looked to. This was a fact he could not deny even if he wanted to. He had already turned into a powerful force of sorts. Hai Liangyi fell ill, and everyone in the world panicked. Hai Liangyi rejected Han Cheng's memorial, and before the Empress Dowager gave her reply, the officials and students had already kneeled for a day. Without realizing it, he had become the thorn in the Empress Dowager's flesh, far more than the overbearing Han Cheng. Hai Liangyi braced himself to hang on and said, "The Imperial College students have the duty to discuss official affairs to begin with, and the Imperial Court is a place where the world has their eyes on. It's only when there are discussions that there can be strategies. Your Majesty heads the administration diligently and attends to affairs personally. Still, officials are appointed to share the burdens of their superiors at the top and oversee the work of their subordinates at the bottom. It's Dajo's blessing that they are concerned about state affairs. What's more, the matter of the Crown Prince is not just a family affair. This subject thinks that it's only by letting them remain here that we can have an open discussion on the issue of the new emperor. It was not stuffy and warm in the hall. There were bamboo blinds hanging everywhere to hold in broken blocks of ice. To Hai Liangyi, it was even a little cool. He stood with his head lowered after he was done saying his piece. Behind the beaded curtain, the Empress Dowager remained silent for a long time. It was only when Hai Liangyi's legs were aching that she finally answered in an unhurried tone. What the Secretariat Elder has said makes sense. In that case, I shall listen to you. As for the matter of the second son of Prince Yang's grandson, I still have yet to see the clan registry, so it's inappropriate for me to come to a conclusion. But Han Cheng's people are already here. Do you want to let the Court of Judicial Review assist in the checks, or would you prefer the Ministry of Justice to do it? I shall do as you say. Chapter 121, Liangyi. Chapter 121, Liangyi. Hai Liangyi did not want to be supported by anyone after the court session was dismissed. Kong Qiu and the rest knew that the Secretariat Elder was a strong-minded one who did not like to look weak, and so they only dared to follow behind him and watch as he hobbled along alone and made his way slowly down. That official robe of his soaked in the last of the evening rays like a scar blending into its brilliance. At this time last year, he had led hundreds of officials in attending court. What an imposing, spirited sight he had cut back then. But now, there was no trace of this will and spirit to be found on him. Hai Liangyi reached the end and stopped. He slowly turned back to look at the officials on the stairs, then at the last remaining sunset glow above the upturned eaves of Mingli Hall. It's getting dark. Hai Liangyi said gently. Be careful on your way back. For some reason, Kong Qiu felt a tinge of fear at this moment. He strode a step out with the intent to support Hai Liangyi by the arms. Choking a little with emotion, he called out, "Teacher." Hai Liangyi waved a hand at him and turned around to walk towards the palace gates. The descendant of Prince Yang's grandson born to a concubine was Hai Liangyi's last line of battle. He watched as that setting sun was covered up by the buildings. A sense of powerlessness washed over him. He knew what it signified for a child of the Han clan to ascend to the throne. He had fought this battle for 30 years, and his steady pursuit to sue for peace had never once scored a victory. He could only try his best to set himself aflame and throw these old bones of his into the intense fire, hoping that the spatter of sparks would be able to light up the night sky that had been deadly still for so long. An endless night had descended upon Dajo, and he seemed to be the only remaining torch left. But to date, he still could not bring himself to admit that Qi Hualien and the rest who had once shared the same goal in spite of their differing paths had all failed. He watched as those geniuses fall like shooting stars, one after another, leaving himself as insignificant as ever. 30 years ago, Hai Liangyi was not concerned with success or failure. 30 years later, Hai Liangyi was all burned out and spent. Steadily but surely, he walked on his own path and attempted to hold back Qi Hualien, who was taking extreme, radical measures as he charged ahead. But he failed to do so. No one knew that the night when the entire Eastern Palace was wiped out was the most pained moment in Hai Liangyi's life. It was already dark. By the time Hai Liangyi made his way to the palace gates, he was already panting. He lifted his sleeves to wipe his sweat and saw Yarrow Wenyu standing beside the sedan waiting for him. Yarrow Wenyu came over to help him up. Hai Liangyi took his seat, and just as Yarrow Wenyu was about to lower the curtain, Hai Liangyi said to him, "Yuanjua, there is a load on my mind that has yet to be resolved. Make a trip to Wucheng tomorrow on my behalf. Pack your bags tonight." During the court session a few days later, the Empress Dowager exempted Hai Liangyi from standing. But the more she treated him with such courtesy and respect, the more it meant that her dissatisfaction with Hai Liangyi was intensifying. This was because the imperial censors from the Chief Surveillance Bureau had been working as one these few days to launch a series of scathing rebukes at Han Cheng. Cries of demand for an official verification of the child from the Han clan rose to an all-time high, and this tidal wave surging around Hai Liangyi was forcing the Empress Dowager to make a concession. The Empress Dowager had a hard time sleeping in the day and at night, and her hesitation put Han Cheng in a desperate situation. Gradually, it dawned on Han Cheng that the Empress Dowager was trying to take advantage of the conflict to destroy him. As long as he could not bear the weight of the burden and perish under the voices of castigation, the Empress Dowager would be able to support the Han clan's child into ascending to the throne immediately and eliminate the possibility of Han Cheng making a power grab. When that time comes, she would be able to focus on confronting those of humble backgrounds. Whether she would be giving Hai Liangyi the cold shoulder or have the Grand Secretary of the Grand Secretariat replaced, she would be able to do it with more ease than she could at present. Han Cheng was unwilling to let the matter drop and surrender the power in his hands on a silver platter to others. Even if he had to put up with it, he had to make Hai Liangyi suffer. The situation is unstable at present. Libei in the northeast is eyeing us like a tiger watching its prey, while Zhongbo to the east is beginning to show signs of stirring. Is the world going to take the lead of the Grand Secretary if we don't have a new emperor because the Grand Secretariat keeps delaying the matter of the Crown Prince? Han Cheng's mouth was already blistered from the verbal battle that had gone on for several days running. He suddenly flung his sleeves and said, "If you ask me, the Grand Secretary is rallying his own clique to obstruct the imperial court from designating a crown prince. His intention is condemnable. That's a slanderous accusation." Center Yu rebuked sternly in his capacity as the head of the imperial censors. "We have been discussing the matter of the crown prince appointment for several days in a row, and yet the commander has been unwilling to verify the real identity of the imperial heir officially. So who is the one here trying to hamstring efforts to designate a crown prince? The imperial court had the support of the public previously. If it weren't for the commander's insistence on surrounding the Marquis of Dingju, Xiao Qie, to capture him, how would Kudu find itself caught in such a predicament? If we were to hold someone accountable for this, you'd be the one to bear the bulk of the responsibility." "Well, then." Han Cheng sneered and pointed at Center Yu. "Xiao Qie assassinated the late emperor. As the commander-in-chief of the imperial bodyguard and viceroy of the 8 great training divisions, I'm perfectly justified in taking this person down. You said I did wrong, and that means you're saying that he did right in assassinating the last emperor. You are on good terms with Xiao Qie and Shen Zichuan. Center Xuani, the Ministry of Justice didn't trace their investigation to you, did they? Kong Boren, both of you are truly close friends from the same school. I, Han Cheng, am truly envious." Fury washed over Kong Chio's face. He said, "What nonsense are you spouting? We are still investigating whether Xiao Qie really did assassinate the late emperor. If we just take your words as it is without evidence, then we might just as well do away with the Ministry of Justice. Besides, you were also present during our private gathering, were you not? You drank quite the amount of wine too." Han Cheng said, "I'm an imperial bodyguard. Keeping my ears to the ground at all times and taking records is my duty. If I don't show up when you senior officials have a private gathering, then how can I know precisely what has been said? I have already told someone to transcribe everything that has been discussed in detail that night for Her Majesty. I'm in the clear. Do you people dare to though?" Pan Xiangjie, having received help from Xiao Qie before, was fearful of being implicated, and so he had been keeping a low profile on the imperial court lately. Han Cheng was presently in power, and Pan Xiangjie went along with whatever he said. Seeing them argue again, his lips opened and closed, and he took several small steps back, not daring to cut into the conversation. He made up his mind to be a coward like a turtle hiding in its shell. Gradually, several parties got carried away with their verbal assaults on each other. Center Yu was the most eloquent of all. He cursed Han Cheng so savagely that even if Han Cheng wanted to put up with his words, he was boiling with so much rage that the hand he was pointing at Center Yu with was trembling hard. But still, he kept a clear head as he slid down to his knees on the ground and burst out wailing as though he was going to go for broke. "Your Majesty." Han Cheng lay prostrate on the ground and wept bitterly. "Your Majesty, this subject's heart is as pure and bright as the moon. It's my fault for surrounding Xiao Qie to capture him. It's also my fault that the late emperor was assassinated. And now it's even my fault that we have no one to be the crown prince. As an official, I'm willing to die for my sovereign and be punished by my sovereign. If there is a crime, then it's all on me. Whether I'm to be killed alone or along with my family, I will accept whatever sentence my master dishes out." Kong Qiu found this man truly shameless. He promptly raised his hands to remove his wuxia hat and said, "I am ashamed to be of the same rank as a vile person of this kind. If the real identity of the imperial heir cannot be officially verified, then I, Kong Boren, might as well forfeit this official post." The Empress Dowager abruptly rose to her feet and lifted the beaded curtain to sweep a cold glance over them one at a time before her eyes came to a stop on Han Cheng. She said, "We are discussing official matters on the imperial court, so what are you crying for? Get up." Then she looked at Kong Qiu. "You are a member of the Grand Secretariat and could be said to be the Deputy Grand Secretary. You are someone who presides over the affairs of the state. You keep using your resignation at every turn as a pressure tactic. Are you trying to threaten me into giving in, or are you thinking of fishing for praises? You know it best yourself. Ever since I stood in to act on behalf of the Son of Heaven, I have to ask the Grand Secretariat about all the matters in detail, regardless of its significance, so what is there that can't be explained clearly that you have to keep pushing every step of the way?" All the ministers kneeled. "Our forefathers laid down the rule that the harem cannot interfere in politics. I've been overstepping my boundary time and again that I'm already too ashamed to face my ancestors. Jianheng passed away so suddenly this time. If not for your repeated pleas, how would I have been willing to step out into this court once again to take charge of governmental affairs? We lack an emperor now, and I'm merely a widow who is without a child." Hot tears brimmed in her eyes when she spoke to this point. "When has Emperor Guangcheng ever let me suffer such grievance when he was still around?" Han Cheng seemed to be so moved by the emperor and empress's deep love that he covered his face as he lay prostrate on the ground and wailed. This subject never had to put up with such a treatment either when Emperor Guangcheng was around. "I'm deeply aware that I'm an ignorant and shallow person. I'm merely a soldier. I dare not compare myself with the various major officials from the Grand Secretariat, what's more vie with the Grand Secretary. It's all because of my staunch loyalty and deep love for the Li clan that I dared to return the imperial heir to the imperial court. Grand Secretary, why go to such an extent?" Han Cheng has repeatedly been fanning the flames towards Hai Liangyi. Kong Qiu was burning with pent-up anger deep down. It was with difficulty that he said, "Your Majesty, Heaven can attest to the Grand Secretary's heart and intentions. Designating a crown prince is by no means a small issue. We are beset with difficulties all around at present. Dazhou is already at the most critical moment of survival. If we cannot proceed with prudence and caution, then I fear there will be no end of trouble for the future. I understand this as well. That's why I have called the various excellencies here for days on end to discuss it in detail." The Empress Dowager regained her composure and said, "The imperial heirs after Emperor Guangcheng have all passed away, and now, we can't even find ourselves a crown prince. The harder the crisis is, the more we should work together as one. Han Cheng, hand over Emperor Guangcheng's private letter for the various excellencies present to verify it officially." Where on earth would Han Cheng have a private letter entrusting the child to him? The reason he had been holding out and refusing to hand it over was that he was competing with Hai Liangyi and the Empress Dowager to see who was more capable of stalling. The moment Hai Liangyi relented and the wave of officials from humble backgrounds dispersed, the Empress Dowager's desire to head the country would be unstoppable. When the time came, she would have no choice but to let the child from the Han clan ascend to the throne. By then, he would truly become the minister the child had been entrusted to. The golden age of the Han clan was just right before his eyes. He understood that the Empress Dowager currently wanted to push him into the corner to his death, so he cried even louder. Han Cheng beat his chest and said, "The various excellencies doubt my loyalty, so you may as well let me die. My dear younger brother of direct descent." He ended up being held hostage in Xizhou to this date, all just to hunt down that Xiao Qie. I had an eye injured for the late emperor, and I took 3 slashes of the blade for Emperor Guangcheng. So how can I be a shallow, narrow-minded person who deceives the entire world for my own selfish desire? All they had been going back and forth about was selfish desire. Cries and curses flooded the imperial court. No one else mentioned Prince Yang's descendant again. Kong Qiu remained kneeling, but his heart had already gone cold. Hai Liangyi had not spoken a word today. Supporting himself on the handles of the chair, he suddenly stood up. Countless gazes converged together on him. Officials from humble backgrounds looked on expectantly for the Grand Secretary to turn the table and regain control of the situation again, while officials from the noble clans remained silent and waited for a good opportunity. They all focused their attention on Hai Liangyi, just like they did in the past. Hai Liangyi started coughing. His emaciated, wizened hand trembled as he covered the blood with a handkerchief. He swallowed some saliva and slowly looked around the great hall, then at all these faces. Finally, he looked at the Empress Dowager. Back then, the Li clan reigned supreme, and it took several years of conquest before the empire was finally united as one. Over the past 100 years, generations after generations of Dazhou's officials have, without exception, devoted all their themselves to the court and spared no effort in their duties. Although the city walls of Kudu during the reign of Yongyi are old, its integrity still remains, and its spirit still exists. At the start of the reign of Yongyi, Qi Hualien of Yuzhou successively came in first in all 3 imperial examinations too, and from then, the imperial college flourished. Although the 3 preceptors of the Yarrow clan were born of a noble clan, they advocated freedom of speech and recruited all kinds of outstanding talents. Most of the scholars of humble origins still serving in this imperial court today joined the imperial court during that period of time. Kong Qiu lowered his head. As he recalled the past, he could not help but choke with sobs softly. But then, the period of resurgence during the reign of Yongyi was merely a flash in the pan. It had only been 10 years, and Emperor Guangcheng fell ill. Then the noble clans thrived once again, and prejudices over family status divided the imperial college. From the reign of Yongyi to Xianda, no other scholars of humble origins entered the imperial court. This is the imperial court of the noble clans. Pan Xiangjie looked embarrassed and kept his head bowed in a kowtow without saying a word. Han Cheng wanted to say something, but Hai Liangyi suddenly raised his voice. During the reign of Xianda, the state treasury was empty. This subject made a request to Hua Xiqian to hand over the accounts. He worked in hand with the various noble clan officials who were then serving as the ministers of the various ministries to avoid the issue and dismissed me in a perfunctory manner time and again. In that same year, Jueshi was hit by a disaster, and it was a scene of desolation and despair everywhere. Once again, this subject forced Hua Xiqian to hand over the accounts, only to have him skirted around the issue. Not long later, the troops of Zhongbua suffered a defeat, and the granaries of the 6 prefectures turned up emptied overnight after the battle. To this date, Hua Xiqian had never given a clear explanation of this account. Is this his fault, or is it the fault of everyone here for exacerbating the issue? Alarmed, Pan Xiangjie hurriedly said, about this matter, the Court of Judicial Review has already ever since this subject, High Rensha, has returned to the imperial court. I have been repeatedly remonstrating and requesting to officially verify the real identity of the imperial heir from the Han clan. Han Cheng keeps hesitating, and to date, he is still unwilling to hand over the private letter entrusting the child to him. Left without a choice, I took charge and directed the Grand Secretariat to search through the imperial registry before I eventually presented a memorial to ask Her Majesty to choose and designate the descendant of Prince Yang of Huaizhou as the crown prince. It was a futile attempt. The Empress Dowager was stunned into taking half a step back by this impassioned tone. The beaded curtain fell noisily over her body as she looked at Hai Liangyi in shock and uncertainty. Hai Liangyi was on fire. The fury in his heart had been suppressed for a full 30 years, and it was now burning so intensely that his spirit blazed once more into existence and left the entire hall shocked. He said, "The decline of the state is all my fault as the Grand Secretary. I have been remonstrating with the ruler all my life. I already have no more to fear. Since my remonstration is futile while I'm alive, then I shall remonstrate with Dazhou today with my death. A crown prince can be appointed, but the child from the Han clan must never be appointed as the crown prince. A crown prince can be appointed before anyone could bat an eyelash." Hai Liangyi's sleeves rose with the wind, like falling leaves set on fire right before everyone's eyes. An earth-shaking thud followed. Blood splattered. Dead silence descended upon the entire hall. The Empress Dowager's limbs went icy cold, and she almost slid to the ground. Her eyes traced along that splattered blood with difficulty and landed upon Hai Liang-yi. A moment later, the entire court of officials rose to their feet with exclamations of shock. Kong Qiu practically crawled over on his knees and propped Hai Liang-yi up. Rensha, the Empress Dowager's voice trembled. Why go to such an extent? This one-head smash completely severed Han Cheng's retreat route. Hai Liang-yi used death to attain the wrath of all the scholars in the world. The lad of the Han clan would never be able to become emperor. Whoever dared to risk universal condemnation to seek infamy would be the thorn in the flesh of the world's literati in the future. But even Han Cheng himself was stunned on the ground. Never in his wildest dream could he have imagined that Hai Liang-yi would go to such extremes. With his face drenched in blood, Hai Liang-yi looked up at the high, unreachable roof. He had been seeking stability his entire life. Yet, at this last moment, he took such drastic measures for once. He became the blazing sun that had burst out of Dazhou, flaming with countless rays of light in that pitch-black night. The crane on his chest, 3 which had already been stained red, rose and fell with the last remaining heaves of his chest. He gripped Kong Qiu's hand tightly. "Boren," Hai Liang-yi said softly. "I have done all I can." Chapter 122, The Emperor's Daughter. Chapter 122, The Emperor's Daughter. When Yu Xiaozai spoke to this point, he bent over and choked with sobs, unable to continue. The scholars of their generation who went on to take up official posts either wanted to be the patriotic and loyal Qi Hualien who would lay down his life for his cause, or the Hai Liang-yi who was the stabilizing force that could hold them together in times of crisis. But then, this building teetering under the elements suddenly let loose the thunderous sound of collapse. In one night, it shattered the lofty aspirations of several tens of thousands of people, turning Dazhou into a land where whales abound everywhere. Shun Zichuan turned his head aside silently and listened to the sound of the night watchman on his rounds beyond the courtyard wall. Some time later, Yu Xiaozai stopped sobbing. He covered his face with a warm handkerchief for a moment before he said, "The Grand Secretary's use of his death to remonstrate forced Han Cheng into a dead end, but he refused to give up." The crowd from Imperial College was so worked up that they blocked Han Cheng's sedan on Shunwu Street after the dismissal of the court session and smashed it to pieces. The 8 great training divisions sealed off the Imperial College and captured a few students who had been taking the lead and hauled them over to the Imperial prison. They even cut off the students' supply of food, and so the students went on a hunger strike. Yu Xiaozai could not help but shed tears again. "I initially thought all the scholars in the world would die out at this point. But that night, I saw the flickers of flames 3 among Mount Jingyi, which the Imperial College was on, and that was when I knew of the far-reaching significance of the Grand Secretary. The blaze that spread far and wide had already become a force to behold. To quell the fury of all the scholars in the world, the Empress Dowager once again demanded Han Cheng hand over the private letter entrusting the child to him. She also drove the child from the Han clan who was feigning to be the imperial heir out of the palace. Han Cheng had no choice but to make a concession. He promised to have the private letter officially verified 3 days later. The forged private letter did not have Emperor Guangcheng's private seal. So the Grand Secretariat rejected Han Cheng's crown prince proposal. On seeing this, the Empress Dowager consented to meet with Prince Yang of Huaizhou's descendant to establish the candidate for the crown prince. However, Huaizhou is far away from Kudu. Just as Han Cheng had said earlier, that second son of Prince Yang's grandson of non-direct descent was already advanced in age. He was fatigued from the long journey, and coupled with the fact that he had been through a roller coaster of emotions, he gave up the ghost before arriving at Kudu. The issue of selecting and designating a crown prince completely came to an impasse. Han Cheng, with ulterior motives in mind, used the 8 great training divisions to coerce the Grand Secretariat. He submitted another memorial to make a request for the 8 cities to assist in governmental affairs. He wanted the Empress Dowager to establish a chamber for the deliberation of state affairs, and the candidates listed were all officials from the noble clans. The Empress Dowager shelved the memorial without giving him an answer. Carrying on with the legacy of the Grand Secretary, His Excellency Boren submitted a memorial to consent to the original plan for the chamber, but he asked for the removal of Han Cheng's military power on the grounds that civil officials do not get involved with the military. He wanted to use this opportunity to take down Han Cheng's 8 great training divisions. But Han Cheng refused, so the Grand Secretariat did not give their approval, and both parties' negotiation fell through once again. The lack of an heir was the breaking point of the no-win situation in Kudu. Officials of the Grand Secretariat with Kong Chiu in the lead made a concession in the face of the proposal for the 8 cities to assist in governmental affairs, and this was in line with Hai Liangyi's policy to keep the peace. They had no troops. Chidong was under the control of the Empress Dowager, and Li Bei no longer obeyed Kudu's deployment orders after what happened with Xiao Qiye. Kong Chiu could only choose the lesser of two evils and give way. The bottom line was to strip Han Cheng of his military power. Even if they could not get their own hands on military power, they could not hand over all the patrols in Kudu to the noble clans to take charge of just like before. It was at precisely this moment that Xue Xiuzhua submitted his memorials. Yu Xiaozai let out a vague, bitter smile under the dimness. With one stone, he stirred up 1,000 ripples. This move of his was really too ingenious. Xiao Qiye heard Xue Xiuzhua's name and shifted his gaze a little to look at Shen Zichuan. After a moment of silence, Shen Zichuan lifted his head slightly to look out of the window with furrowed brows. After a moment, he said, "You were right before. This talent is really something else." Rumors of the imperial heir made their way so easily to where we are, stirring us into action. I originally suspected that Han Cheng was the one who killed all those boys after I arrived in Zhongbua. But it now seems that Han Cheng was merely the same as Shi Hongxian. They were all sacrificial chess pieces manipulated by Xue Xiuzhua. A wrong move of a chess piece and the whole game is lost. It was careless of me to underestimate the enemy. The impasse in the imperial court continued for less than half a month when the upsurge of verbal assaults of the imperial college on Han Cheng shifted to the 8 cities' assistants of governmental affairs. Countless students with emotions running high became more and more dissatisfied with Kong Chiu's conservative strategy. At the same time they wrote articles and elegies to mourn Hai Liangyi, they were also mourning Qi Hualien. The way Kong Chiu was at present was not the grand secretary of their expectations. The Empress Dowager made a concession when it came to the child from the Han clan, and this allowed all the students under the world to see the might of gathering various powers into one faction. They were like water droplets from all over who converged together to form the boundless sea. They believed that their combined forces could push over that high wall. The opportunity to get rid of the malady that was the noble clans was right before their eyes. Because Kong Chiu affirmed Han Cheng's proposal for the 8 cities to assist with governmental affairs, the direction of the Imperial College suddenly changed course like the weather in the 4th month. First, an article with impassioned words was stuck to the door of the Kong's residence. Then all the criticisms that had been used to verbally assault Han Cheng were used on Kong Chiu. The students became more and more certain that the scholar officials of humble origins led by Kong Chiu were too weak, and that was why Hai Liangyi was left high and dry by himself in the Grand Secretariat, which led to his eventual decision to choose such a resolute method to remonstrate. They openly listed out all the court officials during the reign of Yongyi and checked, one at a time, whether these officials used to have any relations with officials from the noble clans. News that Center Yu had invited Han Cheng to a private feast spread like wildfire and worked the students up into an emotional frenzy. They labeled Center Yu, Kong Chiu, and even the Minister of War, Chen Zhen, as hypocrites. The sedan Center Yu used to attend court sessions was smashed. He stood at the entrance of the palace gate with his head all covered in blood and pointed to the sky to proclaim that he had no inappropriate relations with the noble clans. Consequently, he got splashed with filthy dung all over. Center Yu could not believe that these were the students of before. He had been with the Chief Surveillance Bureau for 20 years, and he had impeached countless major and minor officials of the imperial court. He even dared to impeach Emperor Guangcheng. But he never thought that he would, one day, be cursed as a scum who sought personal gain without shame. The Yarrow clan had always been an exemplar of scholars who were concerned with politics but remained political outsiders who kept their distance from those in power. It was an honorable glory for a clan to produce 3 preceptors. Even though they had no one in the imperial court after the reign of Xianda, their influence far surpassed those from the other clans. They were widely respected among the noble clans and those of humble origins. Hai Liangyi, Qi Hualien, Kong Chiu, and other old and new officials of the imperial court were all once recipients of the Yarrow clan's advice and guidance. The thriving of the imperial college during the period of resurgence in the reign of Yongyi had everything to do with Old Master Yarrow's extensive recruitment of talents. But now, the doors and windows of the Yarrow clan's ancestral hall they had set up at the eastern end of Kudu had been smashed broken. If Kong Chiu had not sent someone to guard it, it would have been set aflame that night. This fire even blazed its way to Yarrow Wenyu. He was Hai Liangyi's student, yet he refused to join the imperial court as an official. He did not appear either the last time when the imperial college went up in arms to curse Pan Rugi. And now, new grievances piled up upon old scores. They tore up the essays they had once sung praises of, and likened Yarrow Wenyu to a thief of the noble clan who stole Hai Liangyi's government administration knowledge. Kudu plunged into complete chaos. The moment the Eight Great Training tried to dispatch troops to suppress them, the students would go on a hunger strike in protest. Already, 4 or 5 people had starved to death, and Han Cheng no longer dared to act rashly. At this time, even Qi Zhuyin, who was busy with Bianjuan commandery affairs far away in Chidong, was not spared either. The marriage alliance of Hua and Qi was to take place next month, and those impassioned articles stating their opinions spread like snowflakes to Chidong. The commander-in-chief initially had insomnia, and now, whenever she wanted to sprawl out on her desk to rest, she would get Qi Wei to read out those articles to her. The more unpleasant the scoldings, the more soundly she slept. The fire in Dazhou did indeed start to burn, but not in the way Hai Liangyi anticipated. The night was whizzing with flaming stray arrows all over. They drew a clear boundary between us and the enemies. The demands made were exacting, with black and white clearly distinguished. There was no middle ground for anyone to stand on, only a bitter fight to the end when one side was left standing. Kong Chiu insisted on not taking sick leave, but attending court gradually became a dangerous affair. One day, he went out all exhausted, but he was still in the compound when he saw a stranger walking out from the courtyard. The stranger held up his sword and hollered all around, wanting Kong Chiu to atone for his crimes with his death. He was a bona fide official of the Grand Secretariat, and he often used to receive some students from the other lands, so he had never set up defenses at home. But who knew someone would hold a sword against him now? It was simply the greatest joke in the world. How ludicrous. It was at this time that 3 of Xue Xiujua's memorials were presented. The content of his memorials was like a monstrous wave that instantly extinguished the crackling fire. Following right after, it turned into raging billows that won over the scholars in the world in one fell swoop. In his memorial, he spoke of the innumerable hardships he underwent before he finally found Emperor Guangcheng's daughter, who had been leading a wandering life in poverty outside the palace. He not only had Prince Qin's personal seal as evidence but also relevant witnesses' testimonies that could prove the parentage of this girl beyond doubt. What's more, he asked for an official verification right there on the court. Having a woman as a master could be compared to a disruption in the balance of yin and yang, and a reversal of the sun and the moon. For this was something that had never happened before in hundreds of years. Xue Xiujua's memorial sent the entire imperial court into an uproar. Even Kong Chiu refuted it vehemently and refused to accept it. Following right after, Xue Xiujua presented a second memorial. He revealed in his memorial that this girl had ended up in a peasant household in Kudu. Because she was an exceptionally bright child, she was very well loved by the family. Although the family was poor, they were willing to let her older brother teach her to read and write. As a descendant of Emperor Guangcheng, she was naturally different from the common person. Her family often saw auspicious signs such as rainbows materializing from dew and purple clouds over the house, and so they treated her with even more attentiveness and did not dare to slight or neglect her. This girl was not only intelligent, but kind too. Her neighbors were in distress, and there were elderly starving, so she saved her own food and personally attended to them. Everyone from the villages near and far was unanimous in their praises of her. There were witness testimonies of this incident too. As for her bearing, he would let the various gentlemen ascertain it themselves when this girl came to court. This memorial had already spread beyond the palace walls. Someone posted it in the Imperial College, and it even made its way to every street and lane in Kudu. The emperor's daughter was noble and precious, and the only one who could claim such status in Dazhou at present was the one who was by the Empress Dowager's side, third Missy Hua. The comparison and contrast between the two made the common folks even more sympathetic towards this emperor's daughter. Tea houses and wine taverns all had storytellers who specifically told the legendary tale of this emperor's daughter living among the people, making that extraordinary talent of hers out to be like she was an immortal who had descended to earth. She came from the common masses. Her family had been farming for generations, which, in many instances, was similar to current students from the Imperial College. What's more, she was a righteous and benevolent one who was kind and friendly to her neighbors. She was the most aware of the hardships of the people. For a time, even the students revered her. And it was at this time Xue Xiuzhua submitted his third and most crucial memorial. He said her elder brother was also a student of humble origins. He had previously entered Kudu during the reign of Shenda, but because of prejudices over his family status, he had never made it to the list of those who passed. After returning home, he died depressed. The affection between the emperor's daughter and her elder brother was so deep that this became a source of pain and distress in her heart. On the way to Kudu, she had asked him many times about the condition of Secretariat Elder Hai's illness. When he mentioned how hard it had been for Secretariat Elder Hai to take care of state affairs, the emperor's daughter actually shed tears on hearing that and said, "If I were a man, there would be no way I could have let the Secretariat Elder suffer such hardships." He was a son of non-direct descent from a noble clan, and he had been subjected to harsh treatment on both ends owing to the difference in status between those born of the direct line of descent and those who weren't. Yet, he did not have the same magnanimity as the emperor's daughter, and for this, he felt very ashamed. At last, Xue Xiuzhua said, since there was no law in the world that decreed that priority should be accorded to those of direct descent and those from distinguished clans during the selection of court officials, then there were also no forefathers in the world who said that priority should be accorded to males when it came to the selection for the crown prince, all the more so in view of the fact that Dazhou already had no other choice left at this stage. The students were roused. They had finally found a suitable candidate. The prejudices between parentage and family status made it tough for them to fulfill their ambitions. They saw themselves as fellow sufferers commiserating with the emperor's daughter over her hard lot in life. Li Jianheng was an emperor who had grown up in a life of luxury. He did not understand the hardships of the people at all, and he had been repeatedly impeached by the Chief Surveillance Bureau for his pursuit of petty pleasures at the expense of lofty aspirations. But look at how different this emperor's daughter bestowed by heaven was. She seemed to be the most wonderful woman in this world. She had a heart compassionate towards all the scholars of humble origins in the world. She was the goddess of mercy who had descended to the mortal realm to deliver the masses from suffering. And thus, it was under the buzz of an entire night of discussion that Xue Xiuzhua, who had been lying low without showing his mettle all this while, emerged the victor. Chapter 123. Yanqing. Chapter 123. Yanqing. By the time Yu Xiaozai spoke to this point, the tea on the small table had already gone cold. He continued, "I don't understand. The students were initially so harsh on the officials of humble origins, then why would they flock to Xue Xiuzhua overnight? Don't tell me Xue Xiuzhou, who is merely the common son of the Xue clan, would be able to do his best for those from humble families more than Minister Kong from Tsangjuan Commandery, who has been diligent in administering state affairs. The Grand Secretary went to the trouble to pave the way for us. But who would have expected that it's still the noble clans who gained the upper hand in the end? Xue Xiuzhua might not necessarily let the noble clans gain the upper hand." Xiao Qie poured cold tea and said, he struck this round when his opponents were unprepared, and so caught both sides off guard. The Empress Dowager had been going around in circles with Han Cheng because she had no one in her hands to use. Xue Xiuzhua obviously had not leaked any words of it to the conservative noble clans headed by the Empress Dowager. Furthermore, at the time when the former emperor passed away, he had Han Cheng trapped as a pawn. In other words, he had already offended the noble clans, and this is something he knows better than anyone else. With a worried frown, Yu Xiaozai said, "I've been thinking about it on the way here, but I still can't figure it out. I don't understand what his intention is. The foundation of the new emperor is unstable, and she's a woman to boot. If he did so for merely a moment of power, then even if the Xue clan rises in power, He wouldn't be able to last long under pressure from the Empress Dowager and the others. Thoughts flashed through Shen Zichuan's mind. He contemplated it for a moment, then said, "We can't let go of any clues if we want to probe into a person's motive." During the reign of Shenda at the Nanlin hunting grounds, Hua Xiqian was forced into rebelling, and it was Secretariat Elder Hai and Xue Xiuzhua who masterminded it. At that time, Xue Xiuzhua held office as the chief supervising secretary in the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue and audited their accounts. You said that Secretariat Elder Hai mentioned this matter before he died in remonstration. Then my guess is that Xue Xiuzhou was aware of the inside story of the Zhongguo troops' defeat. This was probably the reason he could later go on to join forces and work as one with the Juesh's Provincial Administration Commissioner, Jiang Qingshan, to investigate and take out Hua Xiqian. Looking at it this way, this person is not of the same kind as Wei Huaigu, because he has been striking out the noble clans right from the start. I once heard Shi Hongxian talking about him. He said Xue Xiuzhua was busy all day with governmental affairs. After I took office as the northern judge of the Imperial Bodyguards, I sorted out the case records the Imperial Bodyguards and the Court of Judicial Review joined forces to investigate. I discovered that he did indeed handle many cases after he was transferred away from the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue to the Court of Judicial Review. Secretariat Elder Hai was an upright person who would never stoop to flattery, and his repeated promotion of Xue Xiuzhua is not without merit. Even His Excellency Center has spoken to me many times about Xue Xiuzhua. His political achievement to date could be said to be outstanding among the up-and-coming talents. Enlightened, Yu Xiaozai said, "To tell you the truth, Vice Commander, this is where I can't figure it out. All along, Xue Xiuzhua has a good reputation. Even the imperial censors from the Chief Surveillance Bureau hardly have any objections of him. The Chief Surveillance Bureau's appraisals of him are excellent. This is clear as day to everyone, so I really can't understand the rationale behind his current actions. Because as we have seen before, he's not a man like Pan Rugi who would seize the opportunity to get rich." Xiao Qie leaned back slightly and put up his arms. He said to Shen Zichuan, "That's right. We talked about Xue Xiuzhua too when we were in Kudu. Yarrow Wenyu said before that although he was not accepted by Secretariat Elder Hai as his pupil, he was very much in Secretariat Elder Hai's good books, and this was the reason Secretariat Elder Hai let him hold the crown during Yarrow Wenyu's coming-of-age ceremony. In the first few years when he joined the imperial court, the essays he wrote were all on doing away with the prejudiced views of the noble clans in the hope that the imperial college, headed by Hua Xiqian, could be restored to its former glory in its heyday during the Grand Preceptor's time. As you know, other than Hai Liangyi, the Grand Secretariat, as well as the 6 ministries under it, was then composed of officials from noble clans. For a time, priority during the selection of officials in Kudu was given to those from distinguished clans. Even the illiterate 13th son of the Hua clan could take up an important post in the Ministry of War and intervened with the imperial army's affairs. Kong Qiu was still stewing in the Ministry of Justice at that time, while Liang Tsuishan from the Ministry of Revenue was repeatedly demoted during the same period, with no hope of a transfer and promotion. Shen Zichuan nodded his head slowly and said, "The fact that he was able to hold the post of the Chief Supervising Secretary in the Ministry of Revenue at that time is an indication of Hua Xiqian's intention to send him away. The Chief Supervising Secretary is an important post that would give him direct access to the Emperor. But at that time, Emperor Shenda was unable to take charge of the government. Hua Xiqian, who was in charge of the Grand Secretariat, had the final say over whether he would be able to build up an outstanding track record in this position. It was at this period that Xue Xiuzhua's approach to tackling matters began to shift. He went from taking radical measures to keeping a low profile for a time, eventually settling into the way we later come to be well acquainted with. The more Yu Xiaozai listened, the more alarmed he was. He said, "But since he is in the same camp as those from humble origins, why didn't he get in touch with us?" That Han Cheng, he gave the best he could in the incident leading up to Li Jianheng's ascension to the throne, but very quickly, he came to the realization that Li Jianheng was not bold, decisive, and visionary enough. Back then, Li Jianheng was constantly wavering in the tug-of-war between several parties, and the officials of humble origins led by Secretariat Elder Hai failed to get rid of the Empress Dowager. Shen Zichuan turned his head aside, causing the little jade on his right ear to be obscured by shadows. He continued, the Imperial College students repeatedly mentioned weakness in their attacks of the officials from humble origins. This is probably the reason Shuexiuzhua no longer trusts scholars of humble births. Secretariat Elder Hai's conservative policy allowed Dazhou to survive, but he also gave the noble clans a chance to catch their breath. The noble clans give to one another, like how Wei Huaigu fell this time only for Han Cheng to rise. This is not the result Shuexiuzhua wanted. Shen Zichuan suddenly stopped and narrowed his eyes. No wonder he took teacher away. Qi Hualien was the most important figure of the radicals, those who were in favor of thorough and complete political change. He had been actually working hands-on in the Eastern Palace. The Crown Prince did not live for long, yet he could still accomplish feats such as the registration of the common folks into the census register. Tapping on the Eastern Palaces subordinates diligence in discharging their official duties and tenacity to forge ahead regardless of public opinions. If Shuexiuzhua wanted to change the conciliatory approach during the time Hai Liangyi headed the administration, then he was bound to seek Qi Hualien's help. But Qi Hualien declined. So Shuexiuzhua handed Qi Hualien over to Han Cheng. Shen Zichuan pursed his lips tightly. His side profile was cold and detached under the candlelight. He said, he'd stop at nothing to achieve his aims. This person doesn't believe anyone else. He still wants to rely on the new emperor to sustain Dazhou, and for this, he does not hesitate to offend the old-school noble clans. He wants to bring in new blood to Kudu and overhaul the system. We defeated Wei Huaigu and the others in Kudu, and their falls have now turned into vacancies in which he can install these new blood. Your Excellency, you're wrong. It was not how wonderful the emperor's daughter was that the memorial he presented could move the hearts of all the scholars in the world, but his last sentence. There is no law in the world that decreed that priority should be accorded to those of lawful birth and those from distinguished clans during the selection of court officials. The noble clan's domination of the upper echelons of the government once again turned Dazhou into an imperial court dominated by the 8 clans. The Li clan emperor's assertiveness, or the lack of it, dictated whether those from humble backgrounds would be able to kill their way out of the heavy siege laid by the 8 clans. They underwent a low period during the later years of the reign of Yongyi. This was too long a time. What they desperately needed was a sovereign who was well disposed towards the scholars of humble origins. Gender did not matter. As long as this person was able to rouse the hearts of the humble scholars, and shoulder the weight of the humble family's expectations after the successive passing of Qi Hualien and Hai Liangyi, then this person would be embraced. After the Empress Dowager took charge of the government, those of humble origins not only had to put up with the intensified ostracism but also the weakness and incompetence of the Li clan's emperors that had taken firm roots in the minds of the masses. The reason why the students were so harsh on Kong Qiu and Center Yu was that they could no longer endure the repeated concessions made by the present imperial court. Hai Liangyi, who had endured it for a lifetime, had already died in remonstration, so why must Kong Qiu still keep on enduring? The reform of the world was at hand, right now. Doing nothing was tantamount to a neglect of duty. But was it really a good time now? Shen Zichuan thought otherwise. Why did Hai Liangyi endure it? Because the noble clans had already become a chronic disease of Dazhou. They ought to have scraped the bones and healed the wounds long during the reign of Yongyi. But as it turned out, the troops of Zhongbua suffered a defeat before Hai Liangyi could make his move. Dazhou was just like an old man in his twilight years who was kicked in the waist by another until he coughed out blood. It was hard for the external wounds to recover, and even harder for the internal wounds to heal. Right before his death, he questioned the imperial court, asking if this was everyone's fault for exacerbating the issue. But did this everyone include himself too? If he had not pushed Hua Xiqian every step of the way, if he had been able to deal with it with a more conciliatory attitude back then, would Zhongbua be able to avoid the subsequent tragedy of having its cities massacred? Hai Liangyi did not know, but this incident directly affected the way he headed the administration in the later period of Emperor Xianda's reign. He partook in the imperial court with an even more placatory attitude. He did not dare to act rashly again. He had the reckoning and awareness of one mired in the current political situation, but these were things that the fledgling students did not understand. Perhaps Xue Xiuzhua did not have the power to guide the direction in which the students of the world moved. But he was no doubt a fisherman standing among the stormy waves trying to figure out the most optimal time to cast his net. This person did not return empty-handed after rolling and crawling in the official circles for many years. He even understood the dispute between the humble scholars and the court officials more than Sun Zichuan did. Since the flames of war of the old clique had already been ignited, then the sparks erupting at present had similarly kindled a fire in those of them who upheld the same ideals. Xue Xiuzhua had repeatedly asked to be under Hai's Liangyi tutelage in a formal teacher-pupil relationship. But he did not get his wish. He eventually turned to Hai Liangyi to ask for help. And still, he failed to get his wish. He seemed to be a rock in the tussle between both parties, destined to use his own method to charge his way out amidst the bloodshed. This was a merciless character who would not even spare himself. Ruthlessness brimmed in Sun Zichuan's eyes. He felt as if he had been thwarted. He was driven out of Kudu, like a stray dog with its tail between its legs, beaten to the point he was almost defenseless. Xue Xiuzhua was able to forsake Shi Hongxian instantly at the right time, and he emptied the Shi clan's silver warehouses before Sun Zichuan made his move. This showed that he had long been preparing for this day. And what had Sun Zichuan been doing at that time? He was still naively thinking that he could rely on his eloquence to drive a wedge between the noble clans, even though it was clear that Xue Xiuzhua had long revealed his mettle during the imperial army's silk case. Sun Zichuan had already been defeated once. Since he was still alive, then he had to fight this battle to the end. As someone who had inherited Qi Hualian's life work, he could not accept himself being dogged by defeat again and again. They had already gone from a battle-free Kudu to the crumbling land of the frontier that was torn apart by disunity. He had to stand up again immediately. Otherwise, there would be no place for him in these turbulent times. There were no weaklings among the up-and-coming talents who were looking on covetously like a tiger eyeing its prey. He had to acquire the rights to challenge the other party before he could sit down and delve further into the topic of beliefs in a calm manner. Xiao Qie looked at Sun Zichuan's silent side profile and suddenly asked Yu Xiaozai, "Have you seen the Empress?" Yu Xiaozai happened to be fishing out the letter center Yu wrote to Sun Zichuan from his robe. On hearing this, he gave a start and said, "Not yet. Before I left Kudu, the Ministry of Rites was already starting to prepare for the enthronement ceremony. The Empress Dowager wanted to summon the Emperor's daughter for a meeting, but Xue Xiuzhua declined." Xiao Qie's hanging fingers swayed gently. He said, "Looks like he isn't that confident of success either. Then let's wait and see if the Empress he has nurtured in 4 short years is a paper tiger who would topple over at just a touch. I'd like to see just how long she would be able to bluff Kudu." Sun Zichuan returned to his senses. After composing himself for a moment, he said, "I just hope she isn't a second Li Jianheng." Xia Qie was tired from leaning. He straightened up his upper body and asked Yu Xiaozai, "We still don't know what her name is. If they are going to register her in the imperial registry, then is it possible that she's called Li Jianting?" A strange expression came over Yu Xiaozai's face. He extended his finger to write on the mat, one stroke at a time. "It's this name all right. But it's not the same character as the former emperor. Rather, it's Jianting, with different words." Li Jianting 3 taken by surprise, Sun Zichuan exchanged glances with Xiao Qie. Chapter 124, The Die is Cast. Chapter 124, The Die is Cast. The first glimmer of dawn appeared in the sky. Yu Xiaozai was a scholar after all, and it was hard for him to hold up mentally after a time, so Sun Zichuan got Chen Yang to lead Yu Xiaozai away for a rest. They could always discuss the remaining matters another day. Yu Xiaozai did not force the issue and withdrew out of the room after leaving behind the letter center Yu wrote to Sun Zichuan. Xiao Qie went to take a bath, while Sun Zichuan read center Yu's letter under the candlelight. The morning light from the courtyard seeped into the room. Sun Zichuan read the part about Bianjuan commandery. He waited for a moment, but Xiao Qie was still not back. He set aside the letter, lifted the bamboo curtain, and walked along the narrow corridor to the inner area. Then he stepped around the screen for a look. Xiao Qie was soaking in the pool, fast asleep. Xiao Qie had been feeling a little tired as he thought about some matters, But who would have known that he would fall asleep while thinking? A sudden chill on his cheek woke him up. Sun Zichuan scooped up the water and stroked Xiao Qie again. He said, "The water has gone cold. Go back and sleep in the room." Xiao Qie rose, sending water droplets splashing all over. He lowered and buried his head into Sun Zichuan's bosom, rubbing against him until half of Sun Zichuan's body was wet. He said in a muffled voice, "Hug me." Sun Zichuan lifted his hand to squeeze Xiao Qie's nape. He said, "Aren't you making things difficult for me?" Xiao Qie said, "Then I'll hug you instead." Sun Zichuan kicked off his shoes and stretched his arms around Xiao Qie's neck that still had water droplets on it. He said a little lazily, "Come on then." Xiao Qie raised his head to press his forehead against Sun Zichuan's forehead. He embraced him and said, "I've seen the Beiyuan hunting grounds. It's still passable. It can be made into a military camp after a little tidying up, but the towers have to be constructed anew. All these will cost money." The lamps were not lit on this side, and the lightning added a touch of sensuality to the atmosphere. Sun Zichuan and Xiao Qie pressed against each other up close. Sun Zichuan said, "The city of Dancheng lies to the west of the Beiyuan hunting grounds. If we are going to come face to face with the 8 great training divisions in the future, we can't skimp on this place. No rush." Xiao Qie exerted a little force to pick Sun Zichuan up and carry him into the room. Sun Zichuan knew that Xiao Qie did not intend to use those silvers of his. The imperial army's expenditure could not always be pegged to Cizhou. What's more, Xiao Qie was about to return to Libei soon. To lack money was to lack confidence. He was probably considering this matter himself. "Center Yu went to the trouble to get Yu Xiaozai to bring a letter to you. He must have a favor to ask of you." Xiao Qie got onto the bed. Without even taking off his robe, he leaned back against the pillow, half-embraced Sun Zichuan, and rested his chin on top of Sun Zichuan's head. He asked, "What is it?" Sun Zichuan had already finished reading the letter. Resting his head against Xiao Qie, he folded the letter and answered, "Center Yu hopes that you can give everyone another chance and act as the bridge between Kudu and Libei." With his eyes half closed, Xiao Qie said, "They are in need of help now, that's why they are willing to lower themselves. If the Grand Secretariat and the Empress Dowager get along in the future, then Libei will have to send another person in as a hostage. If not me, then Zun. The Grand Sun Heir was already 6 years of age now, and Xiao Qie still had yet to meet him. But this did not prevent him from doting on his nephew. This matter was non-negotiable. Xiao Qie softened his voice. "Center Yu is aware this is a difficult matter to achieve, so he hopes I can head south to Chidong and convince Qi Zhuyin to halt the marriage alliance between Hua and Qi. Center Yu is in Kudu year in year out. He doesn't know the details when it comes to Chidong. The commander-in-chief doesn't have a say in matters relating to the marriage alliance." Xiao Qie said, "It's Qi Shiyu who is going to marry Hua Xiangyi, not Qi Zhuyin. Qi Shiyu is a wily old fox. Seeing as the present situation isn't boding well, he does not want Chidong to follow in Libei's footsteps, and so he wants to strengthen ties with Kudu through marriage. What can Center Yu and the rest give Qi Shiyu? With Hai Liangyi's death and the Empress's enthronement, all past promises have become worthless. They have no bargaining chips that they can use to convince Qi Shiyu." Xiao Qie's voice gradually became a murmur as he spoke. Sun Zichuan counted in silence for a few beats, then turned over to look at him. Sure enough, he had fallen asleep. Sun Zichuan opened up the letter once again. His eyes lingered on the word Bianjuan for a moment before he closed it. Xiao Qie had a good night's sleep. Xue Xiuzhua, however, did not fall asleep. He had been resting in his study for several days in a row. The whole affair about the emperor's daughter could convince the students, but it could not convince the shrewd and astute imperial court officials. Kong Qiu felt that the blow Xue Xiuzhua dealt to the Grand Secretariat by taking advantage of present circumstances was not what a gentleman should do. He had already submitted several memorials in succession to protest against the Empress Dowager's tacit consent. But it was a futile endeavor, and he received no response. A conniving, ambitious man of great designs. Thinking how wrong he had been about Xue Xiuzhua, Kong Qiu threw these words at him and refused to discuss any further with him. Whether or not the emperor's daughter ascended to the throne, The imperial court officials led by Kong Qiu had failed to reap any benefit this time round. They fought with Han Cheng and lost their pillar, and they saw Han Cheng make a concession only for Xue Xiuzhua to come barging out of nowhere midway. What he delivered was not the emperor's son, but the emperor's daughter. Everything they had done had been in vain. Center, you did not concede defeat. The criticism of the imperial censors was far more intense than Xue Xiuzhua had imagined it to be. Xue Xiuzhua thought Dazhou was already at the point where they would let the emperor's daughter ascend to the throne. Was he not implying by this that the state and its rule were coming to an end, and that was why an incident such as the reversal of gender norms and the confounding of right and wrong could have happened? Back then, Qi Zhuyin had merely been conferred a title as commander-in-chief, and she had already been repeatedly censured. And now, the Ministry of Rites pored over book after book for details regarding the enthronement ceremony of the emperor's daughter, and there were too many areas in which they had simply had nothing to reference at all. The sounds of castigation in the imperial court never stopped, and memorials impeaching Xue Xiuzhua numbered in the dozens. Are all of you I see here pansies? One Pan Lin had now made a name for himself in the Ministry of Revenue after all the ordeals he had been through. As a descendant of Pan Xiangjie from the old-school noble clan, his reaction on the imperial court was the most intense. Dazhou never had a female crown prince in all its 100 years. Feudal ethics too is the way of heaven. Although the common descendant of Prince Yang has passed, he still has descendants. Even if the royal bloodline is hard to find, Her Majesty can temporarily exercise the rights of the Son of Heaven. We will search again. Xue Xiuzhua stood alone in the middle of these two groups of officials who were polar opposites and said in a steady voice, "All the later descendants of Prince Yang take his surname. Do you mean to tell me that the Li clan's empire should also change its surname to his? It's indeed entirely justified for the Empress Dowager to act on behalf of the Son of Heaven. Since the harem can lead the administration, then why not a female crown prince? You're distorting the fact." Center, you turned aside to look at Xue Xiuzhou. The Empress Dowager acts on behalf of the Son of Heaven, she does not take his place. As long as the crown prince ascends to the throne, the harem will naturally have the authority returned to its rightful master. But if the emperor's daughter has an imperial heir in the future after ascending to the throne, will she be able to return the power? Han Cheng's expression was livid. He understood deep down that he had been duped by Xue Xiuzhua too. The Empress Dowager and all these old-school noble clans were dissatisfied because the attitude Xue Xiuzhua was manifesting was not that of compliant submission. He held the emperor's daughter firmly in his hand, which meant that after the emperor's daughter ascended to the throne, he would have the influence to control court administration and state affairs. To those traditionalists, this was a kind of betrayal. Seeing as the Empress Dowager, who was sitting behind the beaded curtain, had still yet to speak up, Han Cheng said, "Moreover, the emperor's daughter has never been out there in the world, limited as she is to her chamber. How can she assume the responsibility of managing state affairs? In my opinion, the Empress Dowager should still lead the administration after the enthronement ceremony." On hearing this, Kong Qiu wanted to throw up his hands and quit. This situation was like one big sticky mess. At present, none of the parties were satisfied. They were displeased if the emperor's daughter were to ascend the throne, and they were unhappy if the Empress Dowager were to head the administration, but what else could they do? Let the 8 cities deliberate state affairs, and that would upset the student. Kong Qiu wanted so much to beg heavens to hurry and drop a prince from the sky. They were blinded and muddleheaded over 10 years ago not to let Emperor Guangxing beget more sons. If there was still an imperial heir around, would they be in such a predicament? Xue Xiuzhua lifted his arm to point at the old stone inscription outside the hall. He said, "The forefathers had explicitly said that the harem shall not interfere with politics, not the emperor's daughter shall not lead the administration. Since the various gentlemen here are so critical of me today, then may I be so bold as to ask what, in the various gentlemen's opinions, should be done? Do we oust the emperor's daughter and install an emperor of another surname, or do we leave the throne empty and have the Empress Dowager lead the court?" A loud buzz rose in the imperial court, but no one stepped forth to give a definitive statement. It was like this too when they appointed Li Jianheng as the crown prince back then. It was as if they were being pushed to the precipice of the cliff with each step they took with no other choice open to them. If Xue Xiuzhua had come forward a few days earlier to say that he still had the emperor's daughter in his hand, the Empress Dowager and the Grand Secretariat would all have a strategy to deal with it, and they would also have been willing to treat him cordially. But he just had to pin everyone down by their vulnerable point in an attempt to hold the initiative to call the shots in his own hands. He now had the emperor's daughter in hand, and public opinion to back him up. Who would dare to lay a hand on him at this juncture? Kong Qiu took a step back and gave in. He knew such a stalemate was non-beneficial to Dazhou and to them. He said, "There is something the commander said which I find true. The emperor's daughter has been limited to her living quarters for long. Even if she ascends, she still needs to study the classics. In the interim, the Empress Dowager will be in charge of the administration with the assistance of the Grand Secretariat." They had to stand firm in this last stand they took. They had to turn themselves into the threshold that determined if the emperor's daughter had the capability to participate in government independently. Kong Qiu's intent was clear. It was only when the Grand Secretariat found the emperor's daughter capable that she was capable. Otherwise, she would always remain a student sitting on the throne. To the Empress Dowager, this was also a kind of threat. If the Empress Dowager dared to support the Han clan as she did for the Hua, Pan clans during the reign of Yongyi, then they would immediately put the emperor's daughter in charge of the administration and force the Empress Dowager back into the rear palace. The Empress Dowager sat in silence behind the beaded curtain for a long time before she said, "I feel uneasy all day to act on behalf of the emperor. Since there is now a crown prince candidate, it is indeed inappropriate for me to continue doing so. After the enthronement ceremony, I shall retreat to the Buddha Hall and will no longer show myself in public." Since she was going to beat a retreat for the sake of moving the situation along, all those present could only kneel in unison and shout, "Your Majesty is the matriarch of the world. You mustn't put your esteemed self down." Xue Xiuzhua kneeled among them, his back drenched in sweat as he bowed in a kowtow. Surprisingly enough, he did not refute Kong Qiu. Xiao Qie was brimming with energy after a sleep. He had just finished his breakfast and was sitting cross-legged under the eaves feeding Meng. When he heard the news Bianjuan had revolted, he and Meng looked back at Shen Zichuan together. Yu Xiaozai sat on his heels at the side. On seeing this, he hurriedly said, "I was shocked when I heard it too. General Lu comes from a clan of military talents. How could he have revolted?" Minister Kong requested right away for the Ministry of War to check the state of military affairs in Bianjuan. The imperial bodyguards put the supervising eunuch on trial, and it took nearly a month for them to find out that the initial military provisions allocated to Bianjuan were moldy. Xiao Qie was still stunned. He rose swiftly to his feet, blocking off the light inside the room, and said, "Moldy? We agreed back then to reduce Chidong's military provisions by half. No one said anything about letting them pass off inferior grains as quality grains. The warring situation in Libei was critical at that time, but Bianjuan also had to fight battles with Bianxia. No matter how anxious Xiao Qie had been, he would never let anyone stuff Lu Guangbai with moldy grains. He dispatched Chen Yang and Ji Yujin to supervise the process precisely because he was worried someone would mess with the military grains, but he had never expected someone to make a move on Bianjuan. No wonder the commander-in-chief has yet to come and fight me." Xiao Qie raised his arm to let Meng perch. His expression was grave. "She lost Lu Guangbai. Kudu would not dare to be hasty and let her head up north to confront us. They have to let her close up the gap in Bianjuan." But Lu Guangbai, this was Lu Guangbai they were talking about. Xiao Qie's heart sank. He said, "The 20,000 soldiers in Bianjuan are all infantrymen. With nowhere to go, Lu Guangbai can only lead his troops deep into the desert. The desert is the Bianxia cavalry's territory. He will lose the advantage of laying ambushes that he has back in Bianjuan. No doubt he will have to change his usual style of fighting battles. Why didn't he head for Suotian Pass? It would have been fine if he went to Suotian Pass or Tianfei Watchtower. There were still troops of the Feng clan stationed in Suotian Pass. Both of these places could be said to be Zhuo Qianqiu's former units. Zhuo Qianqiu was now a general in Libei, and Lu Guangbai's sister, Lu Yizhi, was Xiao Jiming's wife. No one would ill-treat him if he went to either of these places. But why did he decide to head east? There were only the 12 tribes of Bianxia in the desert. Chapter 125, Meng and Amp, Yu. Chapter 125, Meng and Amp, Yu. There was not much of the 6th month left. Cizhou's garrison troops were already beginning to take shape, and it was time for Xiao Qiye to continue his journey north. Not once had he sent a personal letter to Li Bei in the 2 months he was in Zhongbua. Likewise, Li Bei did not send him one either. Both parties seemed to have come to some kind of tacit understanding. Meng began to spend more and more time out hunting. Xiao Qiye knew it was flying north. He stood in the courtyard today, watching the sun sink in the far distance. It was only when Shen Zechuan rapped lightly on the door frame behind him that he returned to his senses. Xiao Qiye looked back at Shen Zechuan from under the last of the evening rays. Shen Zechuan felt as if Xiao Qiye had grown a little taller again. Those broad shoulders of his bore the weight of the setting sun. He was far more sturdy than he had been 6 years ago. Shen Zechuan watched for a moment until Xiao Qiye turned aside slightly and said, "Let's go horse riding." Unlike the last time they went horse riding in Kudu, Xiao Qiye was serious this time. He led Shen Zechuan up Langdao Shuejin and explained it all to Shen Zechuan regardless of significance, from how to step on the saddle to how to pull on the reins. It was as if he wanted to leave it all to Shen Zechuan, his horse, his eagle, his heart. The 2 men rode on the horse together and trotted along the forested path outside the city of Cizhou. This section of the path was not long. They ran until the last of the sun on the horizon vanished. Stars adorned the vast stretch of the sky behind them, sprinkling the ground with a smattering of light. The lands in the mountain ranges to the north were rich in vegetation and water. Langdao Shuejin ran up the slope. Xiao Qiye reined in the horse and sat in the wind as he said to Shen Zechuan, "The Hongyang Mountains lie at the end." Shen Zechuan looked out into the distance. On this cloudy night, the boundless sky stretched on in the far distance. He could vaguely catch a glimpse of the tall, rising peaks of the Hongyang Mountains. It looked like a dragon lying at the end of the earth, asleep in eternal rest. It drew a meandering demarcation line at the very edge of Dazhou. One could see its contours from Zhongbua, but not reach it from where they were. It nourished the vast expanse of land north of Dazhou. It was a natural formed wall that rose from the earth of Li Bei. Shen Zechuan heard the howl of the wind, a wind that was entirely unlike that of Kudu. It blew against him, sending the sleeves of his robe fluttering like a white bird spreading its wings. This is the call of the Hongyang Mountains. It'll miss me too. When we get closer to it, we will be able to hear the song of the wind even more clearly. Xiao Qiye spurred Langdao Shuejin into a run. They jolted in the wind, shooting across the billows of wild grasses like a bird swooping towards Hongyang Mountains. Meng flapped its wings and chased after them from behind. It circled in the air and dove, leaving behind a line of bent grass in its trail as it swept past. Xiao Qiye suddenly said in Shen Zechuan's ear, "I want to take you there to see it." The puff of warm breath from Xiao Qiye warmed up the little jade earring on Shen Zechuan's ear. Looking ahead, he said, "Xiao Xian." Xiao Qiye turned his head. Shen Zechuan said something, but the wind was too strong, and Xiao Qiye did not hear him clearly. Refusing to let it drop, he moved in closer and motioned for Shen Zechuan to repeat it. Shen Zechuan said, "Keep going, and we're going to cross the border." "Then so be it." Xiao Qiye did not stop. "I'm taking you home to meet my old man and eldest brother." "What did you just say?" Shen Zechuan shouted in the wind. "Where is my fan?" Xiao Qiye scooped up Shen Zechuan in his arms and suddenly reined in the horse, causing Langdao Shuejin to raise his hooves and neigh. The world turned upside down in Shen Zechuan's vision, and a muffled thud rang out right after. Both men tumbled and rolled in the grass along the slope. Xiao Qiye wrapped his arms around Shen Zechuan to shield him. He did not get up when they came to a stop. Instead, he spread his arms and remained lying under Shen Zechuan. He said, "You lied to me." Shen Zechuan pinched his cheek and asked, "Who lied to you?" Xiao Qiye stared at Shen Zechuan as he said huffily, "You lied to me. Liar. Scoundrel. Heartless man." Shen Zechuan tugged over a handful of grass and plastered them all over Xiao Qiye's face. Xiao Qiye did not dodge. He stretched out his arms to embrace Shen Zechuan and forcefully held him to his chest. He said wickedly, "In this life, even if I die, I have to die with you." He hugged Shen Zichuan so tightly that Shen Zichuan's head was buried in the pit of Xiao Qie's neck. Shen Zichuan made a few attempts at struggling, but he could not break free, so he said in a muffled voice, "Xiao, if you suffocate me to death, then you'd be murdering your own husband." Xiao Qie said, "Then repeat what you said earlier." Shen Zichuan gasped hard for breath and finally managed to peek out from under Xiao Qie's palm. With deep feelings, he said, "Xiao, you're suffocating." Xiao Qie rubbed away at Shen Zichuan's head until even the latter's cheeks flushed red and his hair was all tousled, looking not in the least like Vice Commander Shen at all. Xiao Qie said resentfully, "Shen Zichuan." There were bits of grass in Shen Zichuan's mouth. "Huh." Xiao Qie cupped Shen Zichuan's cheeks and lifted the latter's head to kiss him. But just as their lips were about to touch, he stopped and said callously, "Kiss me." Shen Zichuan could only remain in this position with his head slightly raised. He endured it for a moment, then said, "Release your hands then." Xiao Qie said, "Nope. Think of a way yourself." Shen Zichuan could not reach him. Pursing his lips, he grabbed hold of the front of Xiao Qie's robe to yank him over and gave him a peck on the lips. Xiao Qie's expression remained unchanged. Shen Zichuan was still trying to reach him, so Xiao Qie lowered his head and kissed him so hard that Shen Zichuan bent backward. Even his bites were merciless. Xiao Qie's arms were still locked around his waist in a hug, and as Shen Zichuan leaned back, he felt a stab of pain in his neck and sucked in a breath with eyes narrowed. In no time, their positions reversed. Shen Zichuan sank into the grass. He could see the entire boundless starry sky as Xiao Qie entered him. Sounds he could barely suppress escaped his lips as he grabbed a lock of Xiao Qie's hair, which wound around his fingers as they tensed and curled. The stars dazzled before his eyes, and his consciousness gradually disintegrated in the wind. He gazed at Xiao Qie a little dizzily, clearly sensing that the wolf pup was much fiercer than usual. "Xiao," Shen Zichuan dragged out the syllables. Xiao Qie bent down, enveloping him and blocking out all the wind and stars at the same time. "I love you." Xiao Qie seemed to have fallen in love with such whisperings lately. The closer he was to home, the more he would act like a child. He took possession of Shen Zichuan, and he was also taken by Shen Zichuan. He was not stingy with declarations of love such as these. Each time he said it, he would make Shen Zichuan clench hard and tremble in spite of himself. Shen Zichuan seemed to be sighing and moaning as he immersed in the murmurs of words and clung close to Xiao Qie, while Xiao Qie indulged to his heart's content with wild abandon at the boundary of Libei. Only the two of them knew of the debauchery taking place beneath those seemingly intact clothes. With his back to the Hongyang Mountains, and under that enchanting soughing of the wind, Xiao Qie revealed just how feral and domineering he could be. Shen Zichuan gradually forgot all about the Milky Way above as he kissed Xiao Qie. He soared high up in the clouds and fell back into the embrace of the wind, eventually melting into the crooks of Xiao Qie's arms. When Shen Zichuan woke up, the day was just beginning to break. Thin rays of the morning sun shone through the bamboo blinds. He stretched a hand out and felt the fading residual heat beside him. Xiao Qie had gone out of the city earlier, leaving his old robe still hanging on the clothes rack. A small incense had been lit in this room to repel mosquitoes. The mingling of heat still lingered on Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan spread his arms apart and took up both of their spaces. He had yet to close his eyes for the second time when he suddenly propped himself up into a sitting position. He hurriedly put on his clothes and wooden clogs and pushed the door open. "Quick!" The redness at the corners of Shen Zichuan's eyes was visible. In a hoarse voice, he said to Ding Dao, who was under the eaves, "Send that new pair of arm guards to see in post-haste." Ding Dao was feeling a little dispirited because he had been left behind. He was presently sitting cross-legged at the edge of the small pond, drawing as a vent for his feelings. When he heard Shen Zichuan, he did not even put away his brush. Instead, he rose to his feet and attempted to run. A sharp-eyed Qiao Tianya deftly caught hold of Ding Dao's back collar and said to Shen Zichuan, "His lordship brought it with him." The rush of coolness in the morning sobered Shen Zichuan up. He tapped his wooden clog, nodded his head, and made to return to the room when Qiao Tianya added, "But he only took one along. Said to keep the other one for master." Shen Zichuan stood still for a moment without saying a word. He saw it was going to be complete daylight soon, and so he did not intend to return to bed. How many men from the imperial army have been left behind? Qiao Tianya answered, 2,000. They are all at the Beiyuan hunting grounds. Prepare the register of names. The imperial army must not be lumped together with the soldiers from Cizhou. Shun Zechuan pulled the front of his clothes and said, Mr. Chengfeng wants to discuss the purchase and sale of grains between Cizhou and Chazhou in detail. Go tell him that we will discuss it today. Qiao Tianya was not in a hurry to leave. He fished out a letter from the front of his robe and said, Master, you have a letter from Ji Qingqing in Jueshi. Good timing. Shun Zechuan said. Is the fleet of ships in Yongyi Harbor all good? The Shi clan's shops have nothing to do with us, so the surface-level policing will not involve them. But Shui Xiuzhua merely emptied their silver warehouse and left these money-making shops to us. My guess is that he might not have necessarily done it willingly. There are no signs of activities from Kudu. Even if Shui Xiuzhou has a foolproof plan, he can't be in two places at once. There's no one to work out a plan for those shops in Jueshi for him. Qiao Tianya released Ding Dao and said, however, what Ji Qingqing means is that Kudu did not go and created trouble for him, but the Yang clan of Hezhou did. The Yang clan of Hezhou owned the waterways of Chazhou. They were prominent merchants south of Kudu. Lei Changming was able to establish his brigade of bandits because the Yang clan was backing Lei Jingzhe. Shun Zechuan had been thinking about them, so he was not really surprised to hear this. I know very little about the Yang clan. Shun Zechuan said. There's not much news about them in Kudu either. Ding Dao jumped in excitement at his words and said, Young master, I know of this. The one supporting Lei Jingzhe is the current head of the Yang clan, a man by the name of Yang Heru. Rumor has it that he's such an extravagant and ostentatious person that he refuses to go out without a sedan chair worth its weight in gold. He's not only dressed in gold, even the abacus he carries along with him is made of precious gold and jade. He's very, very, very rich. In his haste, Ding Dao's pronunciation of very came out sounding vague, so he lifted his little book and showed it to Shun Zechuan. There was a scrawl drawn in brush of a figure holding up an abacus. He was dressed in copper coins all over, giving off a strong rich man vibe. Where did you hear of this? Qiao Tianya asked. Ding Dao pointed in the direction of the prison and replied, Master brought home a silly lad the last time they caught the bandits. He's almost as tall as Jinji Yi, and he's incomparably strong. I used a few sweets to trick this information out of him. This lad is so simple-minded that he will spill it all if you give him food. Shun Zechuan vaguely remembered that Xiao Qie seemed to have mentioned it. He said, weren't the remaining bandits sent back? Yeah. Ding Dao nodded. But Master said he's too silly. He can't survive if he returns, so we might as well keep him here with us. Shun Zechuan still wanted to know the details of the Yang clan, so he said, bring him here. Zhao Hui fed the eagles at dawn. Wearing an arm guard, he held up his arm to them one at a time to let them perch on him while he fed them meat. At other places, there would be a servant specifically assigned to the eagles to handle matters like these. But when it came to Xiao Qie's generation in Libei, they all liked to do it themselves and raised their own eagles they had tamed themselves. When Zhao Hui fed Yu, who had been following Xiao Jiming all this while, he discovered that its back had been badly scratched, and there was a bald spot on it. What happened? Zhao Hui held Yu and pushed aside its feathers for a look. He asked the soldier on the side, did it fight with someone? The soldier held the leather bag containing the strips of meat and took a few steps with Zhao Hui. He said, I have no idea, General. It went out hunting a few days back, and when it circled back from the south, it was already injured. I had the physician look at it, and he said this wound was caused by the talons of a bird of prey. Yu was a gerfalcon too, and it was considered large in size among all the flocks of birds in Libei. Xiao Fengshu was the one who was taming it originally, but he later gave it to Xiao Jiming. It had followed Xiao Jiming into battle for the last few years, and it had never been on the losing end against the Seika falcons from the Hanshi tribe. Zhao Hui scrutinized the wound and wondered, how strange. Whose eagle is as ferocious as this? One of these words sent a sudden jolt through Zhao Hui's mind. He abruptly turned his head and looked to the south. The breeze was still the same. There were no traces of a gerfalcon in the skies. The sky in Libei was still blue. Chapter 126, Li Xiong. Chapter 126, Li Xiong. Li Xiong was, just as his name suggested, a baby bear. He stayed in the prison for a little less than half a month. Every day, he sat cross-legged with his face to the bars, looking helplessly at the door as he waited for Lei Jingzhe to come and take him away. Seeing as he was young, the wardens all loved to tease him. He was a strong but simple-minded boy who did not get angry even when he was made fun of. The only thing was that he had a terrifying appetite. He could eat a meal for 3 people in one setting. The warden opened the door for a shackled Li Xiong, who asked with pressing urgency, "Has my big bro come to pick me up?" The warden clapped Li Xiong on the back and said nothing to him. Qiao Tianya had arranged for a horse carriage to come and take Li Xiong away. Fearing that Li Xiong might make a racket and stir up trouble on the way, the warden made a special point of securing the fetters around Li Xiong's ankles. Li Xiong was not used to riding in the carriage, and all that swaying made him dizzy. Finally, he arrived at the place, but when he got off the carriage and saw the mansion entrance, he refused to move his feet. "I'm not going in." Li Xiong stood where he was, like a stake nailed to the ground. No matter how they pushed and shoved him, he remained absolutely still. "This place is too big. Once I enter, my big bro won't be able to find me." The weather was oppressively hot, and everyone was sweating profusely just by standing there. The warden, afraid of offending them, was overwrought with anxiety, and so he attempted to hoodwink Li Xiong. "Go in first. We'll bring you out after you go in." Li Xiong found this man to be very much like a weasel with how his eyes shifted around when he spoke. He looked like a liar, so Li Xiong shook his head sullenly and refused to budge. The warden tried his best to persuade him, but to no avail, so he steeled himself and squeezed in together with the others behind Li Xiong in an attempt to push him inside. Li Xiong's heels scraped across the ground. Annoyed from the pushing, he jerked his arms and bellowed, "I'm not going in." "Nope." The men behind him stepped back in unison from the force. The warden saw him struggling and was worried those shackles could not hold up, so he hurriedly ordered, "Hold him down. Don't let him make a commotion." When Li Xiong saw them pouncing towards him, he spontaneously spread his legs in a horse stance, one to hold his body firm and steady. His suntanned face raged with fury. The warden strained himself to the limit and exerted all his strength, but Li Xiong did not budge the slightest. It looked like they were going to be delayed at the entrance. Ji Gang happened to return from his stroll outdoors with Fei Sheng following at his side. Even from afar, he saw the crowd at the entrance along with the horse carriage parked in the middle of the road. With a hand at his back, he was just about to inquire when he saw the wardens exclaim out loud just as Li Xiong threw all of them off him. Such strength! Fei Sheng cheered and watched Ji Gang's expression. Ji Gang was a practitioner of the Ji clan's boxing style, and he valued strength most. Sure enough, his eyes lit up and said, "Where's this lad from?" Fei Sheng hurried over. He did not need to ask, he could more or less guess from the way the wardens were dressed. He clutched, then immediately released the Shochuan blade at the side of his waist, before lifting the chain on the ground with one foot as he said, "Out of the way. I'll truss him up." Shun Zechuan was in the room waiting for Kong Ling and the rest when he heard the commotion before the courtyard. He lifted the bamboo blinds. When he saw Ji Gang entering, he could not help but be taken aback. "Shifu, what's wrong?" Ji Gang handed his birdcage to Qiao Tianya and had him hang it up on the veranda. He bent over to scoop up a few handfuls of water from the copper crock to wash his hands. "Picked up a lad before entering. Take a look, see if he is the one you want." As soon as the words were out of his mouth, they saw Fei Sheng drag in a sturdy lad with iron chains as though he were hauling in a bull. The lad was still throwing a tantrum, and he yanked Fei Sheng towards himself. Fei Sheng was, at the very least, the vice-commander of the imperial bodyguards, and yet his clothes were already drenched in sweat just from the short distance of pulling and dragging. "Oh!" Ding Dao poked his head out from the room and yelled, "That's him, Li Xiong." Shun Zichuan asked, "What's happening?" Fei Sheng wanted to answer, but the chain suddenly went taut, and his entire body was thrown backward and quickly dragged over. Li Xiong pulled at the chain, struggling until cracks appeared on his wooden shackles. He dragged Fei Sheng round and round the courtyard. Fei Sheng's back scraped across the beds of flowers, and mud splattered all over his neck. He had the intention to put on a display of his prowess, but discovered that he could not still his body at all. Qiao Tianya was about to react in that instant, but Ji Gang put out an arm to block him from moving and bellowed, "Dao Zi." Ding Dao uttered an acknowledgement, stuffed his book into his robe, and nimbly leaped over the railing on the veranda. Fei Sheng was still being dragged around. Ding Dao chased after them for a few steps, but knew he could not stop Li Xiong by pulling him, so he stepped down on the chain and called out, "Li Xiong," but he slipped, and his foot got caught in front of the chain. The moment Li Xiong tugged at the chain, Ding Dao fell over backward. Quick-witted as he was, he used both arms to protect his head and shield his cheeks with his elbows as he fell into the soft, loose soil with a thud and tumbled. Flower stems stabbed into his outer arm, blocked by the dogskin arm guard he had just secured on himself. Fei Sheng hooked a foot around the edge of the stone to bring himself to a stop and felt the sharp pain from the chain winding tightly around his arm. Gritting his teeth, he flipped over to his feet and pulled hard until he was almost leaning backward in a crouching position. His veins bulged, and he could not help but cuss, "This darn bear-like strength." Ding Dao leaped to his feet and ran for a few steps before he sprang. Using the momentum from a kick on the railing to propel himself forward, he landed on Li Xiong's back. He pulled at Li Xiong's back collar with one hand, clamped his legs around Li Xiong's nape, and raised a fist, but he did not punch him. Instead, he yelled, "Let go." Li Xiong's shoulders sank from the weight. He was thrown off balance by the force of impact when Ding Dao pounced on him. He bent slightly at the knees to stabilize himself, then released the chain and reached back with one hand to pull Ding Dao off him. He had only just stretched out his hand halfway when he was encumbered by the shackles. Flying into a rage, he whipped his upper body around in an attempt to throw Ding Dao off. Ding Dao held on like a monkey, but while he did not slip off, the book in his robe fell out. Ding Dao's was the most skilled in Qinggong, which was imparted to him by none other than his old man himself. Their family worked as guards in Libei, and they always brought a notebook along with them while on the job to record every single incident regardless of its significance. This book was far more important than their own lives. In order to prevent the book from falling on the battlefield, Ding Dao's old man mastered the Qinggong skill specifically used for the purpose of fleeing for his life. A pity that his old man eventually died chasing after his book, slit in the throat by another. Ding Dao was anxious upon seeing the book slip, and reached out an arm to catch it, but Li Xiong grabbed his arm instead and flung Ding Dao over one shoulder and slammed him to the ground like a fish he had caught from the stream. A loud thud rang out. Ding Dao's entire back slammed onto the ground, and he yelped soundlessly from the pain. Even so, his feet swiftly caught hold of the book even as Li Xiong clutched Ding Dao's collar and hauled him off the ground. Too preoccupied to bother about the blows, Ding Dao tossed the book up with his legs and caught hold of it with one hand. In the next moment, he was slammed down to the ground again. This time, Ding Dao could not hold back. He choked and coughed, feeling the bile in his stomach rise. He lifted his legs and wound them around Li Xiong's arm, then turned over and used the momentum to fling Li Xiong to the ground. Li Xiong's shackle broke from the impact. He rolled to his feet and bulged his eyes in a glare as he charged towards Ding Dao with a raised fist. Halfway there, his whole arm suddenly felt immensely heavy, as if he had, in a blink of an eye, struck a steel plate. Even with that astonishing strength of his arm would not budge. Ji Gang held Li Xiong's fist in one hand, and rebuked, "Back off." Li Xiong was reluctant, but his legs did not seem to obey him, as he was beaten back a few steps by this white-haired old man. Unable to maintain his balance, especially after just getting up, he fell on his butt. Ji Gang flicked his sleeves and pulled Ding Dao up from the ground. Ding Dao stuffed the book back under his robes and said, "Grandpa, he hurt me so much." Ji Gang patted the soil off Ding Dao's back and said, "I told you a long time back that you will sooner or later end up on the short end of the stick by resorting to trickery and evasive tactic. When you jumped on him earlier, you should have used the bullfight move on him. Why did you hesitate?" Ding Dao wiped the sweat on his face, feeling very aggrieved. "He ate the sweets I gave him, and just yesterday he was still chummy with me." Only then did Qiao Tianya fold his arms as he leaned against the pillar. He whistled at Fei Sheng and quipped, "Old Fei, not up to it, huh?" Fei Sheng simply took off his filthy outer robe and laughed as he cursed, "Son of a bitch, why don't you try? This lad's strength is out of this world." Shen Zichuan was a little surprised. Xiao Qie was the strongest person he had ever seen. He could draw the 100-jin conqueror's bow relying on just his arm strength alone, with no need for external aids. It was easy for Xiao Qie to hoist him over one shoulder while getting up a horse or heading into a river. But even Xiao Qie was not this frightening when he was Li Xiong's age. "Which one of your parents is from Bianxia?" Ji Gang pulled Ding Dao behind him, took a few steps forward, and asked Li Xiong. Li Xiong's buttocks were hurting from the fall. His shackles were gone, but the fetters on his feet were still there. He was reluctant to come in the first place. Fei Sheng's treatment had sparked his rage, and this was followed by Ji Gang beating him back. Now seeing Ding Dao being coaxed by others after making his way back under the eaves, he pouted, threw his head back, and burst out wailing. He kicked his legs and cried, "Why are you people bullying me?" Shen Zichuan let his hands droop and said to Ji Gang, "This one's still a child." Ji Gang observed the back of Li Xiong's shoulders and said, "He was fighting in such a haphazard way earlier, relying fully on brute force. Feels a little like wrestling. Lad, tell me honestly, is one of your parents from Bianxia?" Li Xiong ignored Ji Gang. Nothing anyone said could register in his ears at this moment, as he cried particularly hard. He had been following Lei Jingjia since young, and now, without him, Li Xiong was like a little tot abandoned on the streets, at a loss for what to do, and with nobody to turn to. His cries gave Shen Zichuan a headache. Shen Zichuan did not sleep well last night, and long periods of standing made him feel tired all over. He said to Ding Dao, "Give him some more of your sweets." Ding Dao was feeling even more aggrieved now. He felt around his sleeve pocket slowly before finally digging out an oil paper. "It's melted." Qiao Tianyao picked up a branch of blossoms from the ground and held it between his teeth. Looking at Li Xiong with a smile, he stepped over the railing and squatted down before him. He waved his hands and said, "This big brother shall remove your fetters for you and get someone to bring you some food. Do you want rice or noodles?" Li Xiong hiccuped, his face glistening with snot as he sniffled, "I want meat." The bamboo blinds were partially lifted, and it was cool inside the house. Li Xiong sat cross-legged by himself before the small table, grabbing the meat with his hands and feasting on them with great relish. Ding Dao secretly counted the plates, feeling as if he was going to be full just from the counting. His mother is most likely a woman abducted by the Bianxia cavalry. It's chaos along the Chashi riverbanks, and things like this were common occurrences during the earlier years. The Duanzhou garrison troops didn't want to cross the border to give chase either. Ji Gang half turned his body and studied Li Xiong. But with a sturdy physique like this, his father is unlikely to be an ordinary person. I wonder how he fell into the hands of the bandits. If he really has Bianxia blood, then it's not strange that he was abandoned. Shen Zichuan recalled Li Xiong's earlier display of strength. Kudu case files have annual records of names of those reported to be abducted at the frontiers, with the highest numbers reported in Duanzhou. If those abducted women were to get pregnant, the Bianxia tribes, unwilling as they were to raise the kids, would throw those women back along the banks of Chashi River. Though their original families wouldn't want to take them back again either. Fei Sheng had just changed into clean robes. Seeing Qiao Tianya's silence, he said, "It's fine if he just happened to fall into the bandits' hands. What I fear is that the bandits raised him for a specific purpose." "That won't be the case." Ji Gang shook his head slightly. "You've never seen the people from Bianxia. They are just like us. Not everyone can be born to be that big and tall. Look at Libei armored cavalry. Other than requiring you to have the requisite household registration to join the army, they also require you to have the physique, but not all of them are as sturdy as the Prince of Libei. I do think that this lad's father isn't likely to be an ordinary person. He would have been able to get some official posts in the Bianxia cavalry just with this strength alone. However, there is no one like that among the Bianxia generals I know near Zhongbua." "Lad," Qiao Tianya said as he drank the chilled soup, "you've had your meat. It's time for you to talk." There was still meat in Li Xiong's mouth, so he was too occupied to reply. He swept a glance over the group of people, finally resting his gaze on Shen Zichuan, and mumbled something. Ding Dao leaned over and listened carefully for a moment before he turned his head to tell Shen Zichuan, "Young master, he's asking you why you are wearing an earring." "Young master's wearing it because he wants to. What are you asking this for?" "Oh, you saw the same one before, not the same? So is it the same or not?" "Aha. Of course young master's jade earring wasn't bought with money. You've seen it before." Li Xiong swallowed the meat. Without bothering to wipe his mouth, he looked at Shen Zichuan and said, "I've seen you before, at Jedale 4 of Chashi River." Chapter 127, Vulture. Chapter 127, Vulture. Ji Gang rose to his feet abruptly. Nonsense. Although Li Xiong had been beaten back by Ji Gang, he was not afraid of him. He retorted resolutely, "I'm not talking nonsense. I have seen him before. There's a portrait of him in Jedale. My big bro used to live there. I remember it clearly." Fei Sheng thought this did not augur well, considering that he was not Shen Zichuan's trusted subordinate yet, so there were some matters he was not at liberty to remain here and listen. Thus he got up and said, "Seems to me like he's more or less done with eating. Master, I'll inform the kitchen to stop serving up the meat." Once Fei Sheng withdrew, Shen Zichuan asked Ji Gang to sit and said to Li Xiong, "Look carefully. Are you sure it's my portrait?" Li Xiong grasped the handkerchief he used to wipe his mouth with 2 fingers and scrutinized Shen Zichuan for a moment. He answered hesitantly, "It kind of looks like, yet also kind of doesn't." Shen Zichuan felt a slight stir in his heart. He stirred the spoon in the soup and lowered his eyes. "The person in the portrait you've seen is a woman, yes?" It finally dawned on Li Xiong. "Oh, right. That's a woman, you're a man." In just a short moment, Shen Zichuan made plenty of conjectures. He watched the sour plums stirring in the soup and thought back to what Zhu Gui had once said. He also remembered his mother, by Cha, as well as Lei Jingzhe, who had just returned to the prefecture of Duanzhou's territory. "What place is this Jedale?" Shen Zichuan asked without batting an eyelid. Jedale lies to the east of Chashi River and is a part of the area within the Biancha's borders. In the early days, it was a temporary residence for the Zhongbo bandits to hide from the pursuit of the Zhongbo garrison troops, but later, they engaged in the illicit trade of selling women from decent families and was wiped out by the garrison troops of 2 prefectures led by my elder brother, Tan Tai Long. The remaining people defected to the Biancha cavalry, and the one roaming around this place back then was the Biancha's Liaoying tribe. Tan Tai, who raised his head to watch Meng pass through the layers of clouds. Lei Jingzhe came from that place. After leaving the Zhu clan, he had nowhere to go. He thought of following the Zhongbo bandits to make his fortune, so he went to Jedale. But for some reason, he failed to build up a brigade of bandits there and eventually returned to the prefecture of Duanzhou, where he met up with Lei Changming and started to make his mark. After Tan Tai Long wiped out the Jedale's bandits, the Liaoying tribe headed north. Those bandits who had initially defected to them followed them north too. Chen Yang squatted on the ground and rubbed at a handful of dry soil. The Liaoying tribe is now the reserve cavalry of the Hanshi tribe. All the Seika falcons of the Biancha people are tamed by the Liaoying tribe. At first, their status among the 12 tribes of Biancha was pretty low, equivalent to that of an eagle slave, but 20 years ago, an Esuheri one appeared in the Liaoying tribe. Tan Tai, who was not from Libei, so he did not know the implication of this form of address. Ji Yu Jin explained from the side, "That is, hero. You know Biancha is made up of numerous tribes, right?" Chen Yang looked back and smiled at Tan Tai, who, "Only tribes where heroes have appeared can be called as one of the 12 tribes. Coincidentally, our lord and this hero were both born in the same year. Ever since his lordship established the Libei armored cavalry at Luoxia Pass, this hero conquered the 3 tribes of Liaoying, Gaoma, and Chengjiu in the desert and defeated the old chief of the Hanshi tribe in the north with Seika falcons. From then on, he became the one and only great hero to command the 4 tribes since the reign of Yongyi. He also became Libei's archenemy." Tan Tai, who gave a start. "Don't tell me it's..." Xiao Qie had been standing behind them at some point onwards. He tilted his head to drink up the water in the water bag, then picked up from where they left off as he secured the opening of the water bag, its amur. They made way for him, and Xiao Qie stepped onto the clod of earth to look at the Hongyang Mountains in the far distance. Amur is currently the person most likely to be the monarch in Biantia. He has the ambition to subdue the 12 tribes. Xiao Qie had a prominent nose that cast some shadows when he turned his head to the side. He continued, he formed the strongest cavalry in Biantia and became the person since the dawn of history to attack and breach the furthest into the lands of Dazhou. Laohu, the Biantia cavalry you see now is actually the Biantia cavalry that Amur has reformed. He combined the horses from the Gauma tribe and the Seika falcons from the Liaoying tribe together, lowered the height of the Hanches tribe but increased their speed, and completed the deployment that would allow him to battle with Li Bei in the air. Lowered the height. Tantai, who looked at Lang Dao Shuejin and said, Master, are the battle steeds from Li Bei and Hanshi tribe different? Of course they are different. Xiao Qie let loose a laugh, but his smile was faint. At first, in order to keep up with the Hanshi tribe's speed, my father opened up a new stable at Luoxia Pass and stopped using the battle steeds from Suotian Pass. The current battle steeds of the Li Bei armored cavalry are all reared from that time on. Strong and muscular, they are all wild horses from the foot of the Hongyang Mountains, and also the same breed of horses the Hanshi tribe once used. But Amur later came to realize the drawbacks prematurely. He thought that for the same breed of horses, the Li Bei armored cavalry's weight-bearing capacity was stronger. Once the Li Bei armored cavalry removed their armors, the Hanshi tribe's speed would no longer be an advantage. So he took down the Hanshi tribe's horse ranch on the Hongyang Mountains and swapped them for the Gauma tribe's ponies. Lang Dao Shuejin shook its manner and circled around Xiao Qie to eat grass. We have come to grief because of those ponies. Chen Yang gestured to indicate the height for Tantai Hu. The Gauma tribe's horses caught the Li Bei armored cavalry off guard. Tantai Hu did not understand. He had been in the prefecture of Dengju and the imperial army successively, but neither of these was the main forces of the cavalry, so he did not know what was so formidable about the ponies. They are astonishingly fast. The expression in Xiao Qie's eyes grew a little frosty as he recalled the fleeting glimpse he had caught many years before. Those horses are valiant and strong. Although they are small and short, they have great endurance. The Gauma tribe has been fighting battles with the Bianjuan commandery all this while. Outsiders do not understand. They think Lu Guangbai doesn't live up to his name and isn't worthy of being ranked as one of the 4 generals in the world, but put them in his position, and they will know after a trial run that it isn't an ordinary cavalry his infantryman has been launching night raids on to wear them down, but the world's fastest cavalry. Chidong has been stationed in the south with increased military strength for many years, yet they have never managed to weaken the Gauma tribe, and this is all because they could not catch up with the latter. This is also the reason why Kudu isn't willing to let Lu Guangbai dispatch his troops. When they appeared in the grasslands of Li Bei, they nearly crushed the Li Bei armored cavalry, which was just beginning to take shape. The weight increase by my father turned the Li Bei armored cavalry into prey at the mercy of the Hanshi tribe's machetes after the Hanshi tribe's change of horses. To solve this problem, my father chose to continue piling on the weight and turned Li Bei armored cavalry into an iron wall that could move. With the strong wind stirring on the grassland, Xiao Qie lost himself in his thoughts. Laohu, the reason the Biantia cavalry was able to fight their way through Zhongbua 6 years ago had everything to do with Amur's change of battle steeds. If they had continued to use the wild horses at the foot of the Hongyang Mountains without any army supplies, they would not have the stamina to last that long. These horses are not only fast but also tough, and they won't slow down at all when passing through the desert. Paired with the Seika falcons acting as reconnaissance outposts, they will prove to be a great catastrophe to the Zhongbua garrison troops. In fact, this was an issue that had Xiao Qie tossing and turning all night after the defeat of the Zhongbua troops. He had followed Xiao Jiming into battle when he was in Li Bei, and his memory of the Hanshi tribe's present structure had been deeply impressed in his mind. He even pondered to himself more than once what else he could do, other than increasing the weight, if he had been his father faced with such strong troops back then. He looked forward to his eldest brother's answer, and Xiao Jiming's choice to this was to thin down the Li Bei armored cavalry's armor and enhance their mobility. However, Xiao Qie was not satisfied. He was a greedy wolf. He could not simply give up the Li Bei armored cavalry's advantage. However, this was not a problem that could be solved with imagination. For this reason, Xiao Qie opted to head south with the army before entering Kudu to witness the slaughterhouse that was Zhongbua with his own eyes. He also saw Lu Guangbai's infantry. I can't catch up with them. They are too fast. 6 years ago, Lu Guangbai squatted on the ground and drew a map for Xiao Qie. But Bianjuan commandery is pretty good. The beacon towers stretching 10,000 of li can transmit news quickly. At night, we are the bag. As long as we block off the narrow opening, they won't be able to enter and exit freely. When the truncated squad falls behind, then no matter how fast their speed is, they can only be headless chickens. Zhuo Qianqiu once said, an attack is an opportunity to defend, and defense is a strategy to attack. 3. The reason the Tianfei watchtower is able to stand firm without falling is not because of how strong I was as a leading general, but because heaven has bestowed upon Tianfei watchtower a strong geographical advantage. However, Tianfei watchtower was forced to take a defensive stance because once our troops head out, we will not be able to stand up to the Bianxia cavalry's assaults. I was the general who cower behind the city gates. In this world, the only army who can pit themselves against the 12 tribes of Bianxia when it comes to going on the offensive is the Libe armored cavalry. I told your father numerous times never to let the Libe armored cavalry become a real shield, that would cause Dazhou to lose its spear completely. If you become a general one day, remember the setup of opportunities and strategies. The battlefield is a place that undergoes myriad changes in the twinkling of an eye. The moment you fall into the rhythm and pace of the other side, you will lose all your advantages. You have to seize your opportunities firmly, you must learn forbearance. Sometimes, a perfunctory, painless blow is the prelude to exhaustion. The fist has to strike the vital point. But it was too hard. Xiao Qie had yet to think of a solution better than what his father and eldest brother had come up with. He could not even engage in guerrilla warfare like Lu Guangbai did. But he could not forget Zhuo Qianqiu's admonition, and he agreed wholeheartedly that the Libe armored cavalry could not be just shields. They had come this far after having gone through countless refinements not to bask in past glory. In Xiao Qie's eyes, it was all too easy to beat back the Bianxia cavalry, but way too difficult to repel Amua, because the Bianxia cavalry was continuously becoming stronger and stronger under Amua's command. This man had the final say in 4 tribes, he had nothing to worry about from the rear. He was like a vulture born in the desert, eyeing the meat that was Dazhou, all the while attempting to invade it. When Xiao Fangshu changed the Libe armored cavalry, Amua changed the Hanxi tribe. When Xiao Jiming changed the Libe armored cavalry, Amua changed the Hanxi tribe right off. He had an uncanny understanding of the pack of wolves from Libe. Looking at it from a certain angle, they were confidants. He understood the Libe armored cavalry even better than most of those from Libe themselves. Xiao Qie's gaze was blocked by the Hongyang Mountains, just like how he had always been blocked by his father and eldest brother. He had not gone head-to-head with Amua before, yet he was already seeing the other party as an opponent he had to defeat. That was a worldly-wise vulture, well-versed in the ways of the world. Xiao Qie was still a wolf who had just embarked on his journey home. Meng suddenly swooped down, bringing along a gust of wind in its trail that brushed across the guards' faces. It landed on Xiao Qie's shoulders, the bloodstains on its sharp talons leaving rough streaks of blood behind. It had already exceeded the size everyone used to imagine it would be. The only ones who were able to hold it up were Xiao Qie and Shen Zechuan, who was particularly gentle with it. Xiao Qie collected his runaway thoughts and indicated to Chen Yang that there was no need for him to take the leather bag. He turned his head to look at Meng and said, "It has already hunted its fill." But Meng was acting a little unusual today. It stared at the sky with a sharp, penetrating gaze, never once shifting its gaze even when Xiao Qie bent his fingers to stroke it. Xiao Qie followed its gaze and looked over. It was quiet up there in the skies and down here on earth. The strong wind springing out of the grass was like a long serpent. At the same time it bared open its bloody mouth, Meng took to the air once more and pierced through the wind to clutch hold of the Seika falcon that was attempting to extricate itself from the grass. As the other bird spread its wings and flailed, Meng abruptly rose. By the time it brought the Seika falcon before Xiao Qie, this lone Seika falcon had already become a bloody pulp of ripped flesh. Xiao Qie abruptly mounted his horse. As he pulled on the reins, he He surveyed his surroundings. His gaze finally landed on the east. He frowned. He had just entered Libei's territory and had not even reached the Libei relay station yet, so how could the Seika falcon of the Biancha tribes appear here? The sound of drums. Jiyu Jin raised his head and turned around with the wind. Master, it's coming from the east. That's the Bienbo camp, which is also the patrol camp. They have a backup support track that leads right to the northeast provisions bridle path. Chen Yang swiftly got on his horse too. Before he lifted his whip, he suddenly remembered something and turned his head back in astonishment to say to Xiao Qie, the Shosan camp lies to the east of the Bienbo camp. For that's where his lordship's frontline military forces are, along with a year-round reserve of battle steeds to be supplied to the battlefields up north for emergency use. Has the Biancha cavalry fought their way here? Then what about Shosan camp? What about the Prince of Libei? Xiao Qie clenched the reins and spurred his horse into a gallop.